Anyway, enjoy. A day after the Forbidden Scroll incident, Naruto found himself standing in his bathroom, once more tweaking the appearance of his sexy jutsu. It was a habit he'd formed when he first altered the standard hinge to make sure it was as realistic as possible that he'd never really shaken. He'd long ago managed to perfect every little detail of his sexy jutsu transformation. The hair, the eyes, the rounder feminine chin. He made so many tiny alterations trying to make his transformation absolutely flawless that he barely even needed to think about it anymore. He'd taken quite a lot of inspiration from some of the prettier kunoichis he'd seen around the village, but he could never and would never admit that to anyone. They might think he was a pervert, and he'd seen what kunoichis did to perverts. Still, despite his absolute mastery over his own jutsu, Naruto always found an excuse to use it whenever he was alone. Something about it made him extremely happy, and he could never figure out why. Even if he was no longer tweaking and altering it much lately, just looking at himself after a bad day almost immediately cheered him up, which is where he was currently. His naked female self staring at the mirror, his hair occasionally bursting into smoke as he experimented with different hairstyles and colors. Unfortunately, Naruto was a simple guy, so his hairstyles were mostly limited to either pigtails or ponytails. Colors were a little bit easier to experiment with, and he quickly found that his favorite color was a deep blood red. For no apparent reason, something about that color left him feeling warm and fuzzy inside. Naruto had a problem, though. He hated long hair. Something about all that hair on his neck and back made him feel itchy and uncomfortable, and leaving his natural hair in place somehow felt even worse, though this was mostly an internal feeling rather than a physical one. Thus, Naruto concluded that he was going to need help with this. Maybe Sakura would help? However, as soon as he imagined how asking her would go, he felt a shiver run down his spine when he realized she'd probably beat him to a pulp like those scary kunoichi did to that perverted old man. Yeah, big no. What about Ino, then? He didn't really know her very well, but unlike the other kids in his class, she only really treated him badly when he was actively trying to annoy her, which was fair. Not to mention that she was friends with Shikamaru and Choji. If they thought she was a good enough person to be friends with, then he could probably also trust her to help him out with this. Maybe she could also help him decide on some clothes for his girl form. One of the only reasons why his sexy jutsu form was always naked was because he didn't really understand girl clothes. The other reason was to knock out dumb perverts, of course, but like his other secret, he could never tell anyone that. With a determined nod, Naruto dispelled his transformation and went looking for Ino. Team placements would be happening in a week, and no way was Uzumaki Naruto waiting that long just to talk to her about this. Thus, he left his apartment, locked his door, and set out for the Yamanaka flower shop, Ino's mom's shop. It didn't take him long to find the place. It was one of the only shops in the village that didn't ban him from shopping there, and thus, one of his favorite stores. Before, he didn't really know much about plants or flowers, but Ino's mom was nice enough to give him his first plant for free when he was 8 years old, and he'd cherished it ever since. Stepping inside the colorful shop, he saw both Ino and her mom sitting behind the counter chatting, only for both to turn towards him when they heard the bell above the door jingle. "Oh, Naruto, what a pleasant surprise. How's your succulent doing since last time?" Ino's mom, Miko, asked. Naruto grinned and puffed out his chest proudly. "Still alive and healthy as the day you gave it to me. I even managed to find some moth orchids in the forest, and they haven't died on me yet." Miko smiled with approval and nodded. "Good. If you need any help, come to me, okay?" Naruto nodded happily just before Ino piped up, looking curious and in a good mood. "What are you doing here, Naruto?" "Ino, you know a lot about styling hair, right?" Naruto asked, idly looking around at all the flowering plants in the front room. The girl tilted her head in confusion. "Yes? Why are you asking?" Naruto grinned and formed a quick hand seal in reply. "Transform." A puff of chakra smoke momentarily filled the store, but cleared quickly enough to reveal a form Ino had never seen. Naruto had made sure he was firmly clothed this time. Yamanaka Miko might seem like a nice lady, but she was also a retired kunoichi. Ino's eyes widened upon seeing his transformation. Miko gasped and covered her mouth before she could laugh, muttering a quiet, "Oh my, I need your help fixing my sexy jutsu's hair. All this long hair feels really comfortable, and I haven't found a single girl in the village that has short hair." Naruto pouted, his expression sending a metaphorical arrow through Ino's heart. "How is girl Naruto? So cute. Don't make that face at me, you lucky bastard." Ino lamented internally. "Okay, but why do you need to change your hair? How often do you really use that jutsu that the hair actually has a chance to bother you?" She asked as soon as her brain had rebooted. I use this jutsu almost every day. It's my favorite jutsu. Oh, also, can you help me pick some clothes for this form? I don't know anything about girl clothes, so she's usually naked," Naruto admitted. Miko let out a surprise cough and turned to the side as she struggled to hide her laughter. Ino's eyes widened even further and her cheeks turned a bright red. "What do you mean you're usually naked when you use that jutsu?" Naruto shrugged obliviously. "It's not as effective against perverts if I wear boy clothes. Plus, like I said, I don't know anything about girl clothes." Ino huffed, but looked at his Kill Me Orange jumpsuit and couldn't help but think he didn't know much about boy clothes either. She sighed, but really couldn't resist the opportunity to fix Naruto's horrendous fashion sense. Plus, she was really curious to find out what he meant when he said this was his favorite jutsu. "All right, I'll help you. Mom, I gotta help this fashion disaster. Are you going to be okay without my help?" Ino asked, resigned. Miko smiled with amusement and waved her off good-naturedly. "Oh, I'll be fine, sweetie. Go up and have fun." At that sentence, Naruto watched as one of the creepiest smiles he'd ever seen spread across Ino's face, making him wonder if maybe he had made a mistake in asking for her help. "Oh, I will. Come on, Naruto," Ino called, walking around the counter towards the front door. Naruto turned back to Miko and bowed slightly the way she taught him back when she first gave him his succulent, before quickly following after his new mentor. After a relatively short 10-minute walk, Naruto entered the Yamanaka clan compound for the first time. As one of the few clans that actually treated him fairly, he never had cause to infiltrate and prank anyone here, so he was excited to see the district for the first time. Somewhat predictably, the clan leaned hard maintaining a nature-wide vibe, with their buildings frequently separated by large trees and lush greenery. The houses were modestly sized compared to what he'd seen in the Uchiha and Hyuga district, but each one of them looked much more like an actual home as a result. Not to mention the atmosphere here gave off a very cozy feeling, like somewhere he could finally relax after a long day of training. As they walked through the streets, Naruto caught sight of the various clan members going about their lives. Children playing in the streets, shops welcoming customers, and he suddenly felt an unexpected pang in his chest. Seeing this warmth and care compared to the rest of the village, he could only imagine how different his life would have been if he'd grown up in a clan like this one. Maybe he'd have more friends, maybe he'd have aunties and uncles to help him with schoolwork. Maybe he'd be loved. Thankfully, before he could sink too deep into those negative thoughts, Ino noticed her charge slowing down and saw the expression on his face. Her chest ached when she saw him, never having imagined that the bright and overconfident Naruto could look so much like a kicked ninkin. She slowed down her pace so she could walk beside him. "So, Naruto, what did you mean when you said you use that jutsu every day? I've never seen you train with it, and it doesn't seem like a powerful technique. So why do you still use it?" she asked, hoping this would distract him from his, no doubt, unhappy thoughts. Fortunately, her efforts achieved their desired effects, and Naruto shook himself out of his own head, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "I don't know. At first I used it so much because it was the first jutsu I ever created. I wanted to master it perfectly, like Hokage did with his jutsu, you know? But even after I got everything perfect, sometimes I just stare at myself in the mirror and get really happy for some reason." Ino's eyebrows lifted in surprise, and smiled with delight. This was the exact kind of gossip she was always chasing. Many people always assumed she was such a gossip because she enjoyed the drama, but really, she just loved learning about people. And learning this about Naruto, something he likely never told anyone and probably doesn't even understand himself. It was gold. Not that she planned to spread this information, of course. Growing up in a clan of experts on the human mind had taught her better than that. Naruto was already showing some worrying signs in his mental health, so she would do her best to just be a friend and listen. Does it feel like something wrong was suddenly fixed, or does it just make you happy? The boy tilted his head as he thought about it. A little bit of both. Some days I don't feel any different and even like staying as myself, but other days, whenever I transform, it just feels like letting out a breath I was holding in for too long, you know? Now that was a very interesting detail to Ino. She'd originally assumed that he was one of those spirits that didn't match his body types, but that didn't seem to be the case. He seemed equally happy as both a boy and a girl. For some reason, she was weirdly excited that Naruto had basically asked her to show him the ropes to femininity. Thankfully, it didn't take much longer before the pair finally arrived at the biggest house in the district, the clan head's house. Naruto, upon looking at the building and knowing this was the home of the highest authority in the Yamanaka clan, thought it didn't seem as imposing as he thought it would be. You'd expect a shinobi clan head to have a massive estate like the Hyuga do, but this place only looked like a slightly bigger version of the other Yamanaka houses. Before Naruto could think about it too much, Ino opened the front door and grabbed his hand, pulling him inside. She kicked off her shoes at the door, and Naruto followed her lead before she led him upstairs. Once inside her bedroom, and before he could even get a proper look around, Ino let him go and turned around with a strange smile on her face. Okay, we'll start with hairstyles first, because clothes are a much bigger thing to learn about. I want to save the best for last. Sound good? Her words sent a shiver down Naruto's spine for some reason, but still, he nodded. Okay, good. With a nod, Ino turned towards her bedside table and pulled out a handful of magazines from the attached drawer. She shuffled through them carefully before finding one that dealt with hair. After setting the rest aside, she sat down on the floor and invited Naruto to sit in front of her. Once they were both sitting, Ino opened the magazine and flipped through its pages looking for short hairstyles before she stopped and turned around on one page. Okay, first hairstyle. This is a pixie cut. It's an old style from back during the Third Great Ninja War. It was really popular among kunoichi due to its length, keeping a woman's hair out of their faces during a fight, as well as being easy to maintain with minimal products. What do you think? Naruto narrowed his eyes at the image and quickly decided he didn't like it. It was too short, even shorter than his natural hair. Pass. Ino nodded without blinking. That wouldn't have been her first choice either, but wanted to make sure in case Naruto's taste was different than hers. Way too short. She quickly returned to page flipping and landed on another style she thought he might like. What about this one? This is called a wolf cut, very popular among the Inuzuka clan, for obvious reasons. It's a little longer than your current hair, and since it's just as spiky as your natural hair, it should be pretty easy to picture for your transformation. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. It'd look nice. Deciding to try it out, he formed a hand seal and transformed into his female form, this time styling her hair into a wolf cut. Unsurprisingly, Ino had a full-length mirror nearby, so with some minor scooching, he managed to get a look at his reflection. It's a little too long. Another hand sign, and the wolf cut shortened to about chin length. They are much better. Hey, doesn't Kiba's mom have hair like this? Ino grinned approvingly, surprised he'd even noticed after saying he hadn't found anyone in the village with short hair. She does. Hers is a little longer than yours, but it's the same style. Do you want to look for more? Naturally, Naruto agreed immediately. He'd always loved styling his female form and would not have been happy having only one style. For the next 2 hours, Ino had Naruto transform his hair into different styles, even trying out some of the longer styles. Braid crowns, hair buns, half up, half down, so many styles that he'd even revised his opinion on longer hairstyles. He'd definitely try a few of them out sometime for when he really wanted to look good. Ultimately, though, he found that he liked chin-length hairstyles the best and had settled on a shaggy bob cut as his new go-to, with the wolf cut falling in his second place on the lineup. By the end of their session, Naruto had learned a lot about styling hair and had even gotten plenty of practice both picturing those styles to transform into and manually styling them with his own hands. He found himself really glad that he'd asked Ino for help. He'd had a lot of fun. At least, he did, until he saw her finally close the hair magazine and turn to face him with a smile that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Now that that's done, it's time for clothes. I have so much to teach you, Naruto. First, we'll start with that hideous jumpsuit. Something about the way her voice changed and the glint in her, I triggered Naruto's fight or flight instincts, and he immediately jumped towards the bedroom door to escape. Unfortunately, Ino must have been expecting that reaction because before he could even reach the door, it was too late. Mind transfer jutsu. Naruto's body froze, all momentum bleeding off as abruptly as the jutsu connected. After a few seconds, to regain her balance in this body, Naruto straightened up and turned around, slowly walking back to where Ino sat slumped over. As soon as he'd been seated again, her control over him snapped, and Ino jumped up like nothing happened. "Now, let's get started," she chirped cheerfully. An eternity had passed as Naruto was forced into attending a crash course in all things fashion. The light in his eyes had long since faded, and he was only half processing Ino's lecture on noble trends and makeup tips. His mind was so far gone that he didn't even twitch when a knock on Ino's door interrupted them. She paused mid-sentence, and the door opened without waiting for a response. Yamanaka, Inoichi, peeked his head inside and quickly found his little girl, Ino. "Oh, Papa, you're home." Inoichi huffed a laugh. "Of course I'm home. I come home at the same time every day. Did you lose track of time or something?" His voice trailed off when he noticed the young girl standing next to his daughter with a dead look in her eyes. He had to bite his lip to keep his amusement from showing, knowing immediately that Ino had dragged another poor soul into her fashion lectures. "Oh, you have a friend over. Nice to meet you, young lady. I'm Yamanaka Inoichi, Ino's father." He introduced himself. Thankfully, that seemed to bring Naruto back down to earth, though his eyes remained a little glazed over. "Oh, hello Yamanaka-san. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Nice to meet you." Inoichi blinked in surprise and confusion, his eyes narrowing as he got a closer look at her. She was very clearly female considering her bone structure and posture, wearing a black and orange Cheongsam-style top decorated with little orange bunnies, dark gray capris cut pants, and two of Ino's red hair clips in her hair. Her eyes were a familiar shade of blue, and she did have Naruto's exact shade of blonde hair, but it was longer and styled in a conservative but messy bob cut. "Oh, I thought Naruto was—" Inoichi trailed, speaking carefully in case this was one of those moments. "Oh," Naruto realized the problem immediately and absently dispelled his transformation, returning to his usual appearance. "Sorry, Ino was helping me style my sexy jutsu." The incomprehension in Inoichi's eyes only grew, but he'd had experience dealing with the irrational and feral behavior of an Uzumaki and thus decided to ignore it for his own sanity. "I see. Well, it's getting late. Are you planning to stay for dinner?" Inoichi asked with a small smile. The question struck Naruto a bit dumb, having never been asked that before. He was about to answer that he didn't want to be a burden, but before he could, Miko's voice called up from downstairs. "Honey, Ino, Naruto, dinner's ready." Naruto's eyes widened a little, and Inoichi pretended he didn't notice the surprise in his eyes. "Well, that answers that question. Why don't you both wash up and come down for dinner?" And with that, the door closed and Inoichi was gone. Ino, not missing a beat, simply put away her stack of magazines and grabbed Naruto's hand, leading him towards a bathroom where they could wash their hands. It was as they reached the bathroom that Ino realized Naruto had been oddly quiet after the offer to stay for dinner. She turned to look at him and saw his expression looking both thoroughly confused but also strangely happy. "What?" When Naruto answered, completely contrary to his usual confidence, his voice was quieter and unsure but held a twinge of hope. "Is it really okay for me to stay for dinner?" Now, it was Ino's turn to look confused. "Yes? Why wouldn't it be? Mom was never going to let you go home without feeding you. You know that, right?" That only seemed to bewilder Naruto even more. But why? He'd visited Shikamaru's house countless times, even shared snacks with him and Choji whenever he went over, but he had never been asked to sit down for family dinner with them. Was this normal? Did he just not stay at Shikamaru's house late enough? Were the Yamanakas just being polite? He and Ino had never really hung out much before today, so why? For a few seconds, Ino just stared in confusion until a thought crossed her mind, and her face grew a little more serious. "Naruto, you know this is normal to do for friends, right? When friends stay over at your house too late, it's normal to feed them before they go home." Naruto's eyes widened, and Ino was surprised by how vulnerable his expression was. "We're friends." It took all of her extensive mental training to not suck in a breath at that question. Her shallow psychology training was waving massive red flags at her, and she knew she had to keep her composure. If she gave Naruto the wrong impression right now, she'd do irrevocable damage to both his trust and self-esteem. "Of course we're friends, Naruto. You let me style your hair and dress you in cute clothes. For me, that means we're definitely friends now," Ino said firmly, conveying as much sincerity as she could through her eyes. Naruto felt his eyes start to sting, and he scrubbed at them a little too fast. It was embarrassing to be caught crying, but when he dropped his arm, the pure joy in his smile seemed to light up the whole room. "Yeah, we're friends." Ino found herself momentarily speechless, her heart involuntarily skipping a beat. "Oh, I didn't know he could smile like that. Damn it, Naruto. You can't be just as cute as your girl transformation. That's just not fair." Dinner with the Yamanakas was an experience for Naruto. Throughout the whole meal, Miko and Inoichi took turns questioning the children about how their day went. Ino and her mother chatted happily about all the different styles and outfits she'd put Naruto in, while Inoichi was silently comforting the subject of their conversation upon seeing his thousand-yard stare. Naruto almost cried with relief that someone understood the horrors he'd been subjected to. Other than that, they asked Naruto about how school had gone for him, and if he was excited to find out what team he'd be put on. Naturally, he showed his enthusiasm for finally graduating and even went into the details of how he'd done, so even though he failed the exams. When Naruto revealed he'd learned a jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll in only a few hours, they seemed genuinely impressed. When he got to the part about Mizuki turning out to be a traitor, Inoichi frowned but said nothing, as he'd been there when the ANBU dragged him into tea. Naruto obviously skipped over the terrible reveal that he was still dealing with. Instead, he jumped straight into the tale of how he summoned 1,000 shadow clones and clobbered Mizuki without breaking a sweat. Ino was obviously skeptical at his claim, considering what she'd known about his abilities from the academy. Inoichi, however, had a little more context but still thought Naruto was exaggerating about the exact number of clones. Only Miko seemed to believe him completely. After all, she'd gotten to know him quite well over the years that he'd been visiting their shop, and she had long figured out all of his tells. Nothing she saw told her he was lying. "Oh, you can make that many shadow clones, Naruto?" she asked, intrigued. "You don't get exhausted using that much chakra?" Naruto shook his head happily, swallowing down a bite of carriage and rice. "Nah, I barely feel it. Gigi said I had really big reserves. He didn't say how much, but they're at least as big as a Jonin's," he said. This time, Inoichi's surprise was genuine, and he could only be thankful he wasn't drinking something at the moment. If that were true, Naruto was on track to become a true chakra monster, possibly comparable to the tailless-tailed beast in sheer reserves. Jonin-level capacity at age 12 was unbelievable. Ino looked confused. Wait, who's Gigi? She asked. Naruto tilted his head. That's Hokage Gigi. Now, that could not be misconstrued, and her eyes grew wide with disbelief. You call the Hokage Gigi, and he lets you? Yeah, he replied, confused as to why that was such a big deal. He's always called the Hokage Gigi. Before Ino could devolve into a full freakout, Inoichi steered the conversation back on topic. Hokage-sama really said your reserves were that big? Naruto nodded proudly with a wide grin. Yep, he said that's why I can't do the regular bunshin. I have so much chakra that it's like trying to fill a cup of water at a waterfall. Impressive. Are you keeping up with the leaf-sticking exercise? With reserves that big, control should be your main training focus. Inoichi asked, laying his chopsticks down next to his empty plate. Naruto's face grew a little sheepish at the question, and he rubbed the back of his head with a nervous little smile. Of course I am. Inoichi and Miko couldn't help but chuckle at the obvious lie. Now, Naruto, I won't rib you too hard about this since we don't really know each other that well yet, but as one ninja to another, keep practicing the leaf-sticking exercise. I know it's boring, and it feels like it really isn't doing anything to help you. But if you ever want to create your own jutsus instead of modifying ones that already exist, you'll need complete control over your chakra. The Jonin explained, making expert use of his abilities to properly motivate someone like Naruto. And just as he expected, Naruto's eyes widened with realization. He had no idea chakra control was that important. He was now more determined than ever to work on that boring-ass leaf exercise if it would help him create his own jutsus. He nodded firmly, his eyes narrowing with determination. I will. Inoichi smiled and nodded approvingly. Good. Once you can stick 10 leaves anywhere on your body and keep them there without even thinking about it, ask whoever your Jonin instructor is for the next chakra control exercise. With that final piece of advice, dinner ended, and Naruto made sure to express his gratitude by helping Miko clear the table. He tried to help her wash the dishes too, but she firmly set her foot down on that. Instead, Naruto decided it was probably time to leave. He thanked Inoichi and Miko for having him over, some ingrained instinct telling him it was proper to do so, before Ino walked him out. Since her house was in the middle of the compound, Ino was walking him much further than the door, and so slipped into her shinobi sandals alongside Naruto. As soon as they were outside, Naruto realized how late it had gotten. The sun had fallen behind the horizon, and the sky was only slightly brighter than full darkness. Ino walked slightly ahead of him as she led him to the gates, a comfortable silence stretching between them. Are you going to name her? Ino suddenly asked. What? She turned to look back at him questioningly. Your sexy jutsu. Are you going to name her? The question brought him short as he'd never intended to do so. However, after thinking on it a little more deeply, it really wouldn't make sense for a girl to be named Naruto, would it? I never thought about it. Maybe Naruto. Ino stopped dead before giving him the flattest stare he'd ever seen. Really? Naruto puffed up defensively, his cheeks a light red. What? It's a good name. I don't want it to be too different from my real name, you know? Ino frowned and narrowed her eyes at him before she sighed. Well, fine. That's a pretty good reason, I guess. Naruto relaxed at the concession and smiled happily. Told you so. Ino could only huff with amusement. As they grew closer to the gates, a thought crossed the Yamanakas' mind. You know, I just realized that jutsu of yours would be incredibly useful for infiltration missions. I can't even tell that it's an illusion, and even Papa thought you were a real girl for a second there, she mused. Now, he'd never thought about using his prized jutsu like that, having only ever used it to hide from the ANBU after a prank. And he would definitely look into that idea later, but something about what his new friend said needed correcting. Ino, my jutsu isn't an illusion. It's a real transformation, he explained confusedly. Once again, Ino froze and spun around completely to face him. What? She shouted incredulously. Naruto tilted his head obliviously. Yeah, watch. Transform. With an absent-minded hand seal, he transformed, and his newly updated kunoichi form re-emerged with a tiny puff of smoke. He held out a slender hand towards her, inviting her to test him. Ino's shock washed away temporarily as she reached out to take his hand. Unfortunately, it came back almost immediately as soon as her fingers met Naruto's real flesh. She rubbed, pulled, and pinched his wrist and forearm and confirmed without a doubt that it was a genuine transformation. Ow! She muttered faintly. Everything she knew about both Naruto and transformation jutsu suddenly being cast into doubt. Naruto shrugged like it was no big deal. I didn't know it was supposed to be an illusion. Pieces started clicking into place as his previous troubles with the transformation jutsu, in second year, suddenly gained new context. Wait, is that why it took you so long to learn it? Naruto nodded. I had to steal books on how the body worked and what muscles went where and did what before I could do it. Somehow, that revelation was even more shocking. Naruto had gone out of his way to read books just to learn jutsu? Naruto, I think everyone was so wrong about you that it's not even funny. To be able to create a full transformation in your second year in the academy, you'd have to be really smart and equally as talented just to do it. Oh. Without his input, Naruto's eyes started stinging with tears, and his chest grew incredibly tight. The sheer validation and acknowledgement was overwhelming in the best way. Normally, he was a very expressive boy, but he wasn't comfortable being this vulnerable yet, so he forced back the tears and tried to compose himself. I didn't know that, he said softly, his voice cracking slightly. Naruto's reaction once again told Ino quite a lot, and her disbelief was set aside as she squeezed the hand she was still holding. You're smart, Naruto, and if you could create a jutsu like that without even realizing it, you're definitely more than talented. I think you just need better teachers, she said softly but firmly. Naruto sniffled but smiled at her, softer but no less genuine. Thank you for saying that. Ino nodded before she took his hand and continued walking him to the gates. The rest of the trip passed in silence. Naruto was bathing in the warmth and validation he'd just received, while Ino made plans to talk to her dad about some very suspicious revelations she was starting to make. They reached the entrance 5 minutes later, and Ino finally let go of the still transformed Naruto. I hope you know that now that I know your transformation is real, you aren't getting out of me, taking you shopping for some real clothes. Ino teased, smirking at his full body shudder and the haunted look in his eyes. All right, sure, Ino. He shook off his dread quickly and smiled gratefully. Thanks for the help today, by the way. It was a lot of fun. Ino's smirk softened into a more genuine smile. You're welcome. We're friends now, so if you ever need more help, come to me, okay? Naruto's smile widened, and he nodded happily. Got it. Good night, and I'll see you soon. Good night, Naruto. Inoichi watched the children put on their shoes and leave. He waited a few seconds before walking into the kitchen where Miko was currently washing dishes. What are you thinking? She asked as she rinsed off a plate. Inoichi stayed silent for a long moment, the dinner conversation lingering in his mind before he let out a heavy sigh. I don't know what Lord Third was thinking if he thought this was better than letting us adopt him. He's obviously inherited Minato's genius, but he's still the class dead last. Miko nodded in agreement, her expression flat as she voiced her suspicions. I think that was the point. Inoichi looked at his wife with confusion. What do you mean? She wiped off her hands and turned to look at him. Come on, Inoichi. You're the head of the intelligence division and a master of psychology. Take a step back and look at this clinically. Why would Naruto, the fourth Hokage's son, be isolated and ostracized after what his father did? Not even being a Jinchuriki would justify this behavior. Inoichi frowned, unconvinced, but took his wife's advice and cleared his mind to look at the situation objectively. Naruto was the son of fourth Hokage. He was also the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Minato and Kushina died, and Lord Third denied any of their friends from adopting Naruto, instead sending him to an orphanage. The Jinchuriki secret was leaked not long after. Public behavior shifted, and he was either shunned or scorned ever since. His training records don't match his aptitude. His test scores are notoriously low, yet he learned a technique from Forbidden Scroll in mere hours. The discrepancy is too large. The only adults who have his trust, as far as I know, are Lord Third, Irika, Tucci, and Ayam Ichiraku, and Miko. Look at it this way, it's almost like, no, he wouldn't do that to Minato's son, would he? Inoichi asked, disbelieving. Miko shrugged, but her cold eyes told him all he needed to know. I don't know, but it's definitely suspicious that, with as much power as Lord Third has, Naruto still grew up isolated and undereducated. He doesn't even know about his own clan, Inoichi. Inoichi had to suppress his instinctive defense of his Hokage, realizing the excuses he was about to give did not justify any of the boys' treatment. There's no reason why Naruto shouldn't have been told about the Uzumaki. They had already been wiped out a little over 30 years ago, with only a handful of survivors scattered across the nation. Inoichi's eyes hardened. He didn't know whether the third Hokage was doing this on purpose, but he was clearly neglecting his duties. Thus, the Yamanaka would make up for his mistakes by looking after the boy Hiruzen was supposed to look out for. We'll have to teach him, then. Lord Third may be able to prevent us from adopting him, but Naruto is visiting of his own free will. He can't stop us from taking care of him like Minato and Kushina would have wanted whenever he's here. Miko nodded firmly, agreed. I've tried my best over the years to give him a maternal figure, but now that he's friends with Ino, I can justify meddling just a little more. With that decided, they continued discussing their plans while Inoichi helped his wife wash the dishes. Ino had returned home after leaving Naruto at the gates suspicious and peeved. Now that she was alone, she could address the inconsistencies she'd noticed in her conversations with Naruto. She had seen clear-cut evidence that he was not as dumb as everyone believed him to be. In fact, he was actually pretty dang smart if he was able to both learn a solid clone jutsu and create a true transformation jutsu, all on his own. And yet, he'd always been the dead last of their class, even held the record for the worst test scores in the last 10 years. She needed to understand why. She'd have to dive in her own memories to carefully review them. She'd definitely missed something. Forming a tiger seal, she activated an E-rank Yamanaka Haiden that enhanced recall and allowed her to see her memories as if in third person. After all, people notice a lot more about their surroundings than their conscious minds can usually recall. Starting at the beginning, she didn't notice much in their first year. Mostly just a surprising distaste for Naruto coming from the teachers. There was definitely discrimination there, which made her angry that she'd only just noticed, but it never really escalated beyond them making faces. That was until Mizuki showed up. From second year onwards, Naruto's grades and performance started to lag behind his peers. It started with his practical grades, the subject Mizuki was in charge of. Taijutsu, Shuriken Jutsu, Kunai throwing, the only thing Naruto excelled at was physical conditioning, and only because he had inhuman stamina levels. While Ino and her classmates were taught the Academy's foundational taijutsu forms, Mizuki taught Naruto the wrong forms. He separated Naruto from the rest of their class so no one would notice, but it couldn't hide from her hiding. Her memories showed her more of the same. Naruto's taijutsu getting worse with Miyazuki's encouragement, his test scores dropping fast as other teachers gave him harder exams, sent out of the classroom during important lectures. Throughout his entire education, Naruto was being taught habits that would get him killed out in the field, and the realization made her sick. By the time she came out of her memories, Ino was furious. And what did she do when she was furious? She stomped out of her room and towards her parents' room, entering without knocking. Miko was lying in bed, reading a book while Inoichi was sorting through reports at his desk. They both looked up upon hearing her come in and noticed the expression on her face. "Honey, what's wrong?" Miko asked, marking her page and closing her book. Inoichi's eyes sharpened and his expression grew thunderous, his normally keen mind making an incredible leap of logic when it came to his daughter. That brat didn't do anything to my baby girl, did he? No, he didn't do anything. He told me something. Ino clarified, knowing exactly how overbearing her father can get. Oh, so he thinks he's slick, does he? Dining at our table only to go behind our backs and try to steal my precious little girl away from me. I'll kill him. Inoichi stood up fast, marching over to his wardrobe to grab his mission weapons. Ugh, Dad, Naruto was actively sabotaged at the academy, she shouted, knowing he was mostly kidding but worried for her friend anyway. Her dad got real weird about boys being around her, and she was never completely sure how much his reaction was just for show. Inoichi paused, turning to look at his daughter again, his incandescent rage dissipating. What did you say? Ino huffed while Miko tried not to laugh at the amusing byplay. When I was leading Naruto out, he told me that his transformation wasn't an illusion, that it was a true transformation. I tested it, it was true. However, if it was really that smart that he was able to do that, his talent should have been noticed at the academy, you know? Inoichi froze at the revelation that Naruto, the dead last of his class, could use a true transformation. He wanted to ask more questions, but Ino clearly had more to say. So, as soon as I got home, I used the trace of memory hidden to look over my memories and saw Naruto actively being sabotaged. Mizuki taught him the wrong taijutsu forms and had him practice shuriken jutsu with chip tools. The other teachers saw that and started doing the same, giving him harder test papers, sending him out of the class during important lectures. Inoichi's face darkened as Ino explained what she'd found in her memories. Even Miko looked furious on Naruto's behalf. That level of sabotage would have been incredibly difficult to hide from the Hokage. His telescopic jutsu allowed him to check in on the academy whenever he wanted, and he did so often. After what he and Miko had just discussed, he was starting to think she was right. He wouldn't be able to do anything without proof, but this was enough to bring in Shikaku and Choza. I understand, Pumpkin. I'll handle it. You and your mom just focus on helping Naruto. I'll deal with everything else. Ino's anger and indignation relaxed at her father's promise. If he said he'd handle it, then she had nothing to worry about. She nodded and turned to her mom instead. Mom, I know there's not a lot of time before team assignments, but can you help me at least correct Naruto's taijutsu forms? He won't master them in just 6 days, but I don't want him to fail the Jonin Sensei's test. She asked earnestly. Miko smirked, her eyes finding Inoichi's surprised ones. After all, he made it a point to hide the existence of the Jonin test as a way to teach her to gather her own information. So, you know about the Jonin test? Ino scoffed, but smiled smugly. Of course I do. Papa is a great ninja, but he acts so suspicious anytime he hides things from me. The other clan members seemed to know what he was hiding because they were all trying not to laugh, so I just asked around. Miko giggled mirthfully, Inoichi's expression turning simultaneously betrayed and sheepish as the truth of his weakness to his daughter was exposed. Miko, on the other hand, was extremely glad that Ino had asked for her help in training Naruto. She'd been waiting years for the excuse to be able to do more for that boy. And this was it. Of course I'll help you, sweetie. We'll reserve a training ground closer to his house tomorrow afternoon. Ino beamed, her shoulders fully relaxing with a concrete plan in place. Great. I'm going to shower and get ready for bed then. She trotted over happily to give her mom a hug and a kiss, turned to give her papa a hug, then walked out to her room to gather her clothes. Silence filled the room for a moment longer before Inoichi broke it. She didn't give her papa a kiss. He muttered sadly, once again causing his wife to break into laughter. Hinata Hyuga sat numbly in her bedroom, her thoughts still stuck on what she'd seen the other day. It had all started innocently enough. As usual, she decided to visit her favorite sweet shop after clan training to soothe her dampened spirits. She was halfway there when the object of her obsession ran past her in the opposite direction. From his expression, She could tell he wasn't just wandering around aimlessly. Naturally, she grew a bit curious. She decided to follow him. After silently chasing him for a few minutes, she watched as he entered Yamanaka flower shop. That alone wasn't unusual. From her years of stalking watching him, she knew he was pretty much a regular there. Her worry began when she noticed Naruto talking more to Ino than to her mother. From what she knew about him, and it was a lot, Naruto had never been particularly close to Ino. In fact, Hinata didn't think they'd ever even spoken before, so why did Naruto seek her out? Her thoughts stuttered with confusion when she saw him suddenly transform into his sexy jutsu. She'd only ever seen him use that jutsu against perverts. But what unsettled her most was Ino's reaction. Her cheeks were very faintly blushing, unnoticeable to anyone without a dojutsu. Her stomach dropped, and a fear she hadn't even realized had been lurking suddenly bloomed at her chest. The fear that she would lose before she could even try. For one reckless moment, Hinata imagined stepping through the door and hugging Naruto close, enough that there would be no misunderstanding. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. Her feet didn't move. They kept talking. Hinata wished more than ever that she had learned to read lips before now. And when she saw Ino give Naruto a wicked smile, she sucked in a breath as her stomach churned. That look! For what other reason could Ino be giving Naruto a look like that? Hinata clenched and unclenched her hands with anxious energy, her belief that she had time to win Naruto's heart shattering into pieces. She couldn't stop Ino. He wasn't her man yet. Instead, she was forced to watch with growing dread as Ino led Naruto into the Yamanaka clan compound. She stopped as they passed through the front gates, unable to follow them in. Clan law was very clear. Unless invited in by another clan member, only clan members were allowed inside. Getting caught would look like spying on the Yamanaka heir, and the fallout could even get her ousted from the Hyuga clan. Defeated, Hinata's shoulders sagged as she turned around. She desperately needed comfort more than ever right now, so she made her way back towards her original objective, the sweet shop. Now, the next morning, Hinata was determined to throw her hat into the proverbial ring before Ino could completely capture Naruto's heart. She had admired him for far longer than Ino had ever known him, and she would not give him up without a fight. Thus, she quickly hopped in the shower, brushed her teeth, and got dressed. If she was serious about stealing Naruto's heart, she needed to get him to notice her first. She tossed aside her usual baggy jacket and pulled out a white and purple one from the back of her closet. It was slightly more form-fitting than her usual clothes, but not enough to look desperate. She pulled on some tight capris and styled her hair into its usual Heim cut. As she looked in the mirror, Hinata couldn't help but feel a mixture of confidence and self-consciousness. Despite only just entering puberty, her physical development had leapt far ahead of her yearmates, and she hadn't had long to get used to it yet. It was to her advantage, but she still felt slightly uncomfortable to be showing off so much of herself after trying to hide it for so long. She looked almost like a different person. Before she could overthink it, she firmed her resolve and went down to have an awkward breakfast with her family, as usual. Half an hour later, she left the compound. It didn't take her long to make it to Naruto's apartment. She dipped into her usual alleyway and activated her Byakugan to see if he was home. Naruto was home and, surprisingly, seemed to be practicing the leaf-sticking exercise. She watched for a few minutes, waiting for him to get frustrated or bored, and smiled fondly when he threw his hands in irritation. When it looked like he was getting ready to leave the house, she deactivated her dojutsu and exited the alleyway. She walked a short distance in the opposite direction, then turned so it didn't look like she'd been waiting outside his house. A few minutes later, she spotted Naruto leisurely walking toward the village center and gathered her courage. "Oh, Naruto-kun," she greeted, trying to sound casual. Naruto stopped and turned towards her voice. When he spotted her, his eyes widened slightly, and she was pleased to notice a light pink dusting on his cheeks. "Vuvoaf, Hinata." Hinata smiled nervously, walking over to talk to him. "Gee, good morning." Are you going somewhere? Naruto shook off his surprise fairly quickly, and he sighed with frustration. I need Irika-sensei's help training my chakra control. I was hoping he knew something more interesting than the leaf-sticking exercise. Hinata perked up. Perfect. She'd been looking for an excuse to spend time with him. And while she wasn't a good fighter, she was great at chakra control. Oh, I think all the teachers are busy creating our T teams. But I'm good at C chakra control. If you need help. Naruto's eyes brightened. Really? You can help me? Hinata's cheeks turned bright red at his reaction, forcing herself not to get lost in his sparkling blue eyes. Why yes, I don't mind. Yada, come on then. I know an abandoned training ground we can use. Naruto cheered, taking her hand and immediately marching off in the direction of his secret training ground. It took every scrap of her willpower not to faint at her crush holding her hand. Her slight stumble was easily played off as surprise instead of her knees briefly going weak. The entire trip felt like hours, Hinata burning every moment into her memory, so she would never forget. She memorized the feel of Naruto's calloused hand in hers, his happy babbling, the soft breeze blowing through her hair. She had thought nothing could ever top the memory of Naruto, saving her from those bullies and getting beat up for it. But this was already speeding up the rankings. Finally, Naruto let go of her hand, and she came back to herself. They were standing in a messy training ground not far from a very imposing fenced-in forest. He took off his jacket, walked over to a nearby tree, and hung it up on a low-hanging branch. Okay, please help me, Hinata-sensei. There has to be an easier and more interesting exercise to train chakra control, right? He plopped down on the ground, looking every bit the eager student. Once again, Hinata felt her world go dizzy at the title she'd been given, but she harshly dug her nails in her palm to keep her self-conscious. This wasn't the time to pass out. WWL, and normally after mastering the leaf-sticking exercise, you move on to tea tree walking, she explained, earning her a confused look. Isn't that just climbing trees? But I can climb trees just fine. Hinata shook her head. Here, let me show you. With that, she turned to a tree in Naruto's line of sight and walked up to it. She formed a tiger seal to focus her chakra into her feet and placed one foot on the trunk. With ease, she lifted her other foot and began walking up the tree. She stepped onto a protruding branch and then began walking on it upside down. She turned to her new student and smiled at the sheer awe and disbelief on his face. Whoa, that's so cool, Hinata. Teach me, teach me. Hinata allowed his praise to seep into the deepest depths of her heart and let it warm her completely. It was rare to hear any kind of encouragement, so she deeply cherished any moment she received any. With a quick hop back down to the ground, she walked back toward her student. Oh, of course, I'll teach you. First, you need to gather the perfect amount of C chakra in your feet. Lay down in front of this tea tree, and I'll use my Byakugan to tell you if it's T too much chakra or T too little. Naruto beamed and quickly moved to follow her instructions. Hours later, Naruto dropped to the ground and sprawled out on his back. His shirt was drenched with sweat, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. Thanks to Hinata's Byakugan, finding the perfect amount of chakra needed to balance on sheer surfaces was child's play. By the time his hunger prompted him to rest, he was able to stand on the tree perfectly without worry. Walking up it was still a bit wobbly, but only practice would help him there. Still, just completing the initial stage of the tree walking exercise, he already felt like his chakra was slightly easier to use. Nothing too drastic, but he had reduced the need to form the tiger sign to focus his chakra to just about a quarter of the time. Thanks so much for the help, Hinata. This is much easier than the leaf-sticking exercise. Naruto had been thanking his training partner anytime he made any kind of progress. Thankfully, this had the side effect of reducing the embarrassment for praise of poor Hinata, but it was still something she was getting used to. Apparently, Having an eager student actually listen and appreciate her advice did wonders for self-confidence. "En no problem, Naruto-kun. I was happy to help," the Hyuga replied, her cheeks almost permanently stained red. "Do you need to leave now? I'd like to at least treat you to some ramen as thanks for helping me out," Naruto asked with a grateful smile. Hinata looked up at the sky and realized it was slightly past noon. She had training at the compound to attend soon, but she should have enough time to eat and get back before it started. "I have a little more tea time." Naruto popped up with enthusiasm, pleasantly surprised that she'd accepted his invitation. He'd gotten so used to being rejected that he'd been a bit worried. Luckily, Hinata was just as nice as Ino was. Man, he really should have given a second look to the girls of his class if this was what they were like. Maybe Sakura was the only mean one? Great, let me take a quick shower and I'll meet you at Ichiraku's. Hinata blushed at his reaction but smiled softly. "Okay, I'll see you there." Not wanting to keep her waiting, Naruto pumped his body full of chakra and sped off to his apartment to take the fastest shower known to man. After all, he had a new friend waiting for him. 10 minutes later, after nearly scrubbing his skin raw and turning his hair into a soapy afro, Naruto redressed, grabbed his Gamachan wallet, and jumped out the window towards Ichiraku Ramen. For a minute, and with nothing to do but think, he allowed himself to revel in his recent good fortune. He became a ninja even after failing the exams. He made new friends in Ino and Hinata. His training was going really well, and he got to eat at a friend's house like a normal person. He didn't think he'd ever been this happy before. And while a small part of him worried that it wouldn't last, Naruto was never one to dwell on what-ifs. Instead, he would enjoy his great fortune for as long as he could. Less than 5 minutes later, the familiar smell of ramen reached his nose and his smile stretched wider. Hopping down off the rooftops, he walked into the ramen bar casually and quickly found Hinata sitting towards the end. "Jo, Hinata, hope I didn't make you wait too long," Naruto called happily, immediately taking the empty seat next to her. Hinata jumped, having been a little too lost in her head, and smiled with relief. "And no, not at all. I am glad. Oi Tuchiaji, one miso pork ramen, please." At his call, a smiling face emerged from the kitchen. "You got it. And what about you, Oju-san?" Just a vegetable ramen, thank you," Hinata muttered, her previous self-confidence faltering slightly. Coming right up, Tucci smiled and walked back into the kitchen. Naruto turned to Hinata. "So, we spent so long doing my training. How is your training going?" Hinata's shoulders sagged slightly, her previous good mood slightly dampened by the memories of her training. Normally, she would have tried to deflect the question or reassure him that everything was fine, but things were different now. If she wanted to get close to Naruto and steal his heart, she had to open too. She'd read enough romance novels to know that hiding all your problems and pretending you're someone else just to make your crush happy would only end in disaster. And not very well. Hanabi and my younger sister always beats me in our S-bars and father says my gentle F-fist is too weak, she admitted, her eyes falling to her lap with shame. Naruto frowned, an inexplicable anger filling his chest at seeing her downtrodden expression. He didn't know it yet, but Hinata immediately became someone he knew he had to protect. That's not true. If Sasuke was the best at taijutsu for the boys, then you were the best of the girls. The only people you ever lost to were me and Sasuke. Your dad has no idea what he's talking about. Without really thinking, he reached over to give Hinata a one-armed hug. You're amazing, Hinata. Even if you were bad at fighting, you're really good at teaching. I could totally see you becoming a sensei at the academy. Unfortunately, before Naruto could continue espousing his praise for Hinata, the combination of the hug and kind words finally proved too much for her. She passed out, her head dropping and nearly slamming into the bar in front of her. Luckily, Naruto was still holding her and was able to catch her head before it hit. "Ah, Hinata, are you okay? Ayame, what do I do?" Ayam quickly rushed out from the kitchen, but froze when she saw the scene. Naruto had his hands around a girl. The girl was currently unconscious, but her face was as red as a tomato. Despite that, the girl had an adorable little smile that reassured Ayam nothing untoward had happened. Okay, Naruto, calm down and explain. What happened? Naruto's mouth moved at a rapid pace, and only Ayam's long experience with him allowed her to understand him. When he finished, her face split into a surprised but pleased little smile. Wow, Naruto, who knew you could be so smooth with your words? The boy looked at her with complete confusion, and Ayam had to stifle a laugh. Don't worry about her. She'll wake up in a bit. She's not sick, she just got so overwhelmed with happiness that she passed out. Naruto's eyes widened. That can happen. This time, Ayam couldn't hold back and she laughed loudly. Thankfully, the noise seemed to cause Hinata to stir and her eyes fluttered open with confusion. Before she could settle her thoughts, Naruto's face flooded her vision. Hinata, are you okay? The memories hit her all at once. Her face, once again, turned a bright red, and her crush's proximity threatened to send her into unconsciousness again until Ayam finally stepped in. The older teen was flushed from laughing and panting slightly. Watching her oblivious little brother figure unintentionally flirt with his friend was almost too much bear. Okay, Naruto, back up. Let her breathe. Naruto frowned but nodded and moved back slightly, though he kept his arm around Hinata's shoulders to keep her steady. As Hinata finally calmed down, mortification filled her chest, and she had to fight back a frustrated whimper. She'd been doing so well, too. Unfortunately, she'd underestimated how powerful Naruto's praise was, and combined with his embrace, her heart couldn't take it. She wanted to savor it, damn it. Naruto, she mumbled with embarrassment. Seeing his new friend finally steady herself, Naruto breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. It's okay, Hinata-chan. I'm just glad you're okay. I was really worried when you suddenly slumped over like that. Both Hinata and Ayam's eyes widened at the new honorific, both girls having only heard him call one person, Chan, in his entire life. Naruto, naturally, didn't notice because Itachi chose that exact moment to enter the dining room with 2 steaming bowls of ramen in hand. Order up, the old man announced joyfully, setting the miso pork ramen in front of Naruto and the vegetable ramen in front of Hinata. Thanks, Aji-san. Itadakamasu. Naruto clapped his hands together in a quick prayer and dug in immediately. Itachi smiled and looked over to see the surprised expressions on his daughter and customer's face. What? Ayam shook off her surprise first and gave her father a mischievous smile. I'll tell you later, she said, before finally retreating back into the kitchen. Itachi frowned with confusion before following after her. Hinata, meanwhile, had been so shocked by the added suffix that the urge to faint had completely knocked out of her. Naruto-kun had called her Hinata-chan. He only ever called Sakura-san that, someone he had a major crush on. Her fragile little heart started racing, and a hope she hadn't felt since her mother was still alive filled her completely. Somehow, in just a single day, she'd gained a special place in Naruto's heart. She hadn't even had to do anything special, just be herself. If she was alone, she'd be jumping and screaming with joy. But for now, she had to hold it in. Hey, are you okay? You haven't even started on your ramen yet. Naruto's face snapped her out of her shock, and she came back to herself. All right. Once he saw her take her first bite, the Uzumaki smiled and continued eating. Today was the best day ever. An hour later, Naruto had decided to walk Hinata back to the Hyuga compound, as per Auntie Miko's intermittent lessons. Never let a girl walk home by herself. Lunch had been delicious, the perfect ending to such a successful morning. Naruto had ended up polishing off 17 bowls of various types of ramen, while Hinata surprised him by finishing off a respectable 6. For some reason, that fact made his stomach flip, and not in a bad way. As they walked through the village towards Hinata's house, a content silence filled the space between them. Naruto walked with his arms crossed behind his head, smiling contentedly. Hinata fidgeted with her sleeve, but couldn't hide her own little content smile and rosy cheeks. After a few minutes of walking, they eventually came to a street and officially entered the clan district. Towards the center of the district sat the Hyuga compound, guarded by two Hyuga Chunin. At the gates, they stopped and turned to each other, ready to give their goodbyes. "Thanks again for helping me out today, Hinata-chan. If you're free, I could really use your help tomorrow too. I'll even teach you some of my cool moves in exchange." Hinata giggled softly, but had a hold in a squeal of delight. She'd been looking for the perfect excuse to do this again, and Naruto had just given her the perfect one-all on his own. She smiled brightly. Sure, Naruto-kun. I'm free in most mornings." Naruto's grin widened. "Awesome. Then, I'll see you tomorrow." Tomorrow." And with that promise set, they both turned away, Naruto turning back towards his apartment in the red light district, and Hinata walking towards her home in the Hyuga compound. As Naruto followed the street and was about to exit the clan district, he heard a familiar voice call his name. He couldn't stop his smile from widening upon recognizing it and turned to face the voice. "Naruto, wait up!" Ino shouted, out of breath and flushed from running. The ninja part of his brain frowned at seeing her so out of breath for someone about to become a shinobi. He hoped that she was just that tired because she'd been running around for a while now and not just being out of shape. "Ino, what's up?" Ino came to a stop in front of him, her hands falling to her knees as she sucked in several lungfuls of air. Okay, he was starting to worry a little bit now. "Are you? I was looking all over for you." "Hold on." Naruto went silent and waited a few seconds until she caught her breath. "Okay, sorry about that. I've been running around the entire village looking for you. I went to Ichiraku, to the academy, the training grounds. I even asked Papa if he knew where your apartment was, and you weren't anywhere. Where were you?" Naruto chuckled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. "Sorry about that. I ran into Hinata-chan earlier, and she was helping me learn how to walk on trees." "But where?" "I looked in all the training grounds, and..." Ino froze, her brain only just processing the familiar honorific he'd used for their mousy classmate. Naruto, since when did you call Hinata, or anyone other than Sakura-chan?" "What? What you tell?" Now it was Naruto's turn to freeze. Replaying his words, he realized he had changed the way he called Hinata. He didn't even realize it. And for some reason, it felt different than any time he'd ever called Sakura-chan. Maybe it was because she didn't hit him for calling her that, and even seemed to like it. "I don't know. I didn't even realize I was doing that," Naruto mumbled, staring down at his hands in confusion. Ino stared at him, watching his expression as if the real answer was painted somewhere on it. When he looked down at his hands, she relaxed slightly. He truly didn't seem to notice it. She didn't know if that made it better or worse, to be honest. All she knew was that a small part of her was suddenly feeling a sense of an urgency she couldn't really explain, like something invisible was slipping out of her reach. Well, anyway, I came looking for you because my mom is making me do some extra training, and she wanted to know if you wanted to join." Immediately, all deep thoughts running through his head drained like a kitchen sink. His eyes lit up at the mention of training, more than a bit excited to learn from a ninja that might actually teach him stuff. Hopefully, Ani Miko wasn't as boring a teacher as Irika-sensei, though. That would really suck. "Yeah, totally. Now." Ino huffed at his single-minded obsession with training, ignoring the part of her that found it kind of adorable. "Yes, now. Come on. I'll lead you there." With that, the Yamanaka walked past the Uzumaki. Naruto smiled and happily followed her, the quiet walk giving him a little more time to dwell on his earlier thoughts. When did he start calling Hinata-chan? A few minutes later, the two blondes found themselves walking into Training Ground 31. Yamanaka Miko was currently going through a series of stretches to shake off the rust she'd accumulated during retirement. She paused upon seeing the two children and smiled. "Ino, Naruto, ready for some training?" The slight woman asked. You bet. I'm ready to go. Naruto cheered, taking off his jacket in preparation. Ino forced a smile, a little less enthusiastic. She'd never done any hard physical training, focused mostly on learning her clan's techniques and studying psychology. However, in order to keep her new friend from feeling ashamed of his subpar education, she had to frame this training session as a joint activity, which meant there would be an unfortunate amount of sweating in her near future. Yay, Ino replied dryly, reluctantly dropping into her own set of stretches. Naruto tried to imitate the mother-daughter pair, but found himself struggling to even reach his toes. Both of them made a mental note to teach him proper stretching techniques to improve his flexibility. If he's anything like his father, flexibility will serve him much better than strength training would, Miko thought, quietly noting which stretches he seemed to have the most problems with. So, why we have to stretch like this? He asked with a quiet grumble, stretching and holding his arms across his body. So we don't pull any muscles or hurt ourselves from overtraining, Miko answered, pushing herself out of a split and shaking out her limbs. Huh, but I never pull muscles or get hurt. Miko didn't miss a beat. That might be because you're an Uzumaki. The Uzumaki clan were said to have incredibly resilient bodies and even an accelerated healing factor. Maybe you have pulled muscles before. Your body just healed them before you could notice. Naruto froze for the second time that day, before his head snapped up to the Yamanaka matriarch. Even Ino couldn't help but widen her eyes. She'd known the Uzumaki were a clan from her parents, but the fact that Naruto had blonde hair instead of red had made her think it was more of an honorary surname. I have a clan. The hope in that boy's eyes nearly brought Miko to tears. After so many years of not knowing anything about his origins, to discover he had a clan, it felt too good to be true. She smiled sadly and stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. I am Sore, Naruto. While there may still be remnants of the Uzumaki clan scattered across the elemental nations, most were wiped out by the end of the Second Great Ninja War. Naruto sighed with disappointment, his chest aching despite knowing it was a long shot. Still, even if they were gone, there should still be things he could learn about them, right? Miko squeezed his shoulder. How about this? Let's get started on training, and when we're done, I'll tell you everything I know about the Uzumaki clan. It's a long story, and I think you'll want to sit down for it. Sound good? The boy nodded softly, surprisingly not as frustrated with this lack of information as he usually was with Gigi. Okay, what's first? Miko clapped once she deemed the children sufficiently limbered up. All right, stretching is over. Gather up and we can begin. Naruto popped out of his lunges, suddenly in front of his new sensei, with enviable enthusiasm. Ino, on the other hand, reluctantly stood from her own split and trudged over with resignation. The Yamanaka matriarch couldn't help but smile in amusement at the contrast before turning to look at Ino. Ino, I'm sure you can guess what your training will be. Your dad spoiled you way too much, and let's not even talk about the joke that is the Academy's physical training program. Start with 10 laps around the training ground, and we'll see if that needs to increase or not. Ino groaned but took off jogging toward the outskirts of the training ground to get started, quietly grumbling the entire way. Miko then turned to Naruto. Now, Naruto, you said last night that you learned and mastered the Shadow Clone Jutsu, right? Naruto nodded proudly. Uh-huh. Want to see? Without waiting for an answer, he formed a strange finger-cross hand sign and gathered his chakra. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A large poof of smoke filled the area, temporarily blocking visibility. It lingered for only a few seconds before Miko was treated to the sight of more shadow clones than she'd ever seen a person create before. Her eyes widened with surprise, the boy's earlier words flashing through her mind. Gigi said I had really big reserves, at least as big as a Jonins. She believed him then, but seeing it in person was truly astonishing. Wow, I've never seen so many shadow clones. Naruto, with this many clones, You might have a very unique opportunity here. Naruto tilted his head in confusion. What do you mean? Do you know the special property of shadow clones that makes it unique compared to other clones? Miko asked, her eyes sparkling with ideas. When he shook his head, she smiled and explained. Whenever a shadow clone gets dispelled, its memories and experiences are returned to the original. That means if you have multiple shadow clones working on a jutsu, when you dispel them, all that experience will come back to you. All the Naruto's eyes widened, turning to look at each other in awe. Whoa, that's so cool. I'm gonna learn so many jutsus. Miko nearly let out an uncharacteristic cackle. Her husband was right. Naruto would definitely become a true powerhouse of a shinobi. And with this method of training, she couldn't help but pity his future enemies. For nearly 6 hours, Miko ran Ino and Naruto through the most grueling training regimen they'd ever experienced. Ino managed to finish the initial 10 laps panting, but still standing. Her mom made a note that 10 laps seemed to be the threshold for the right amount of challenge without overworking her. Hopefully, by the end of this 6-day boot camp, she'd be able to handle at least double that, or shinobi life would be miserable for her. Contentedly, she let her daughter rest for about 10 minutes before she created her own shadow clone and had it work with Ino on her taijutsu forms. By the end, the young Yamanaka had collapsed on the ground, drenched in sweat and body aching like she'd never felt before. Naruto's training, on the other hand, had focused almost entirely on controlling his massive reserves of chakra. With the use of his shadow clones, he'd learned how to walk on trees not long after implementing this new training method. However, Miko was not satisfied with this improvement in control, and she made him practice combining the tree walking and the leaf-sticking exercise. Any complaints about the difficulty quickly resulted in his chakra control exercises being paired with dodge drills as he was assaulted by blunted kunai. I'm doing it, Naruto cried, dodging another handful of kunai as he tried to keep his balance. By the time the sun had begun to set, even Naruto's near-boundless energy had been thoroughly spent. He'd collapsed right next to Ino, similarly drenched in sweat and panting like an Inuzuka ninken. For a while, they just lay there in silence, reveling in the occasional wind chill blowing across their overheated bodies. Miko had given them some privacy and was going through some cool-down stretches as the children rested. Naruto's eyes flickered over to the woman with newfound wariness, muscles twitching. Your mom is scary, he panted, keeping his voice quiet. Ino huffed out a strained laugh. I know. This is why. I asked Papa to train me instead. Once again, a hush fell over them. They would have gotten lost in their own thoughts if not for Miko finishing her cooldowns. She walked over slowly, and Naruto's eyes widened. He tried to force his body to squirm away, but only ended up moving a few centimeters. We're done for today, right? Miko laughed, dropping down to sit between them. Yes, we're done. And now that we are, I think it's time I finally tell you about the Uzumaki clan. Naruto immediately ceased squirming, a bright smile spreading across his face as he tried, and failed to force himself to sit up. Tell me. Let's see here. The Uzumaki clan were an ancient clan said to have formed around the same time as the Senju and Uchiha clans. And just like the Senju and Uchiha, they were just as mighty, Miko began, taking on a storyteller's tone. Naruto listened with rapt attention. Whereas the Uchiha had their powerful dojutsu and the Senju had their massive chakra reserves, the Uzumaki were the undisputed kings of an art called Fuinjutsu, or sealing techniques. With it, they could do incredible things like create near-indestructible barriers, seal away jutsus, weapons, even people. Naruto's eyes shone with awe, feeling an unfamiliar pride as she described the strength of his clan. Miko continued with a mischievous smile. They even had a Kekkei Genkai. More than one, actually. The young Uzumaki's eyes widened further, and this time he did manage to shoot up into a seating position. They did. How? What were they? The older woman laughed and gently pushed him to relax. Come, come, I'm about to tell you. Their most famous Kekkei Genkai were called the adamantine sealing chains, or Kongo Fusa. Chains made entirely out of chakra that they could manipulate as easily as their own arms. Skilled Fuinjutsu masters could even imbue these chains with seals strong enough to subdue tailed beasts. Naruto was now quivering with excitement, imagining himself conjuring his own chakra chains and tying up the bastard in his stomach that caused him so much trouble. And if he also imagined ragdolling Sasuke around the training ground with his chains, well, no one would know but him. The other two weren't as well known, but they were just as powerful. Mind's Eye of the Kagura, a powerful sensory technique that could even detect a person's emotions. Naruto's heart lurched at that, remembering all the times he swore he felt someone's hatred for him. Was that what it was? Could he actually have his clan's Kekkei Genkai? Before he could blurt out his discovery, Miko continued. And the last one was the rarest amongst the Uzumaki. It was never properly named, but went by Healing Bite. It granted a user such potent life force that anyone who bit them could be healed of all their wounds. Naruto wasn't as impressed with this ability compared to the others, simply because he found the idea of someone biting him like that really gross. Though, he guessed it did still sound a little cool. Miko was about to continue when suddenly the sound of growling filled the air. Both Naruto and Miko turned towards it and saw Ino, blushing red, holding her stomach, and looking anywhere but at them. Naruto and Miko looked at each other before they burst out laughing. Gaius, Ino whined, burying her face in her hands. All right, come on then. We'll continue this at home. I hope you'll join us for dinner again, Naruto. Miko asked, pushing herself to stand. Naruto groaned his feet but smiled and nodded happily. You bet. I want to hear more about my clan. They sound so cool. Miko helped her daughter to her feet, nodding approvingly at Naruto as Ino wobbled. Good, then let's go. And with slow steps, they left behind the training ground for the Yamanaka compound. Despite Miko's promise, they did not talk about the Uzumaki until well after dinner had concluded. Naruto wasn't too upset about it. He got to revel in the warmth of the Yamanaka family and the feeling of being included. It almost felt like he was a part of it. So, Naruto, where did you learn to stand on trees? I thought the academy cut that part of the curriculum almost 20 years ago, Miko asked. Naruto perked up and explained happily. Hinata-chan helped me out. I was having trouble with the leaf-sticking exercise and got too frustrated, so I want to look for Iruka-sensei for help. But then I ran into Hinata-chan, and she told me about tree walking and even used her Byakugan to help me get the right amount of chakra. Ino's brow twitched near imperceptibly, but in a clan as observant as hers, Miko and Inoichi clocked it immediately. They turned to look at each other, the former with amusement while the latter looked a bit despairing. That was nice of her. Is she helping you again tomorrow? Naruto beamed. Uh-huh, but I guess since I know how to tree walk now, she might not have much to teach me. Maybe I can teach her something instead, he wondered out loud. Ino's eyes shadowed slightly, an inexplicable annoyance rising in her chest. Miko covered her mouth to suppress a laugh. Well, that might not be true, actually. As I'm sure you know, Hinata is part of the Hyuga clan. They're a clan that specializes in taijutsu and chakra control, and are said to be one of the best at both in the entire village. Just because you've mastered tree walking doesn't mean you're done with chakra control, not to mention that we still need to fix the problems in your taijutsu that you're sure terrible teachers taught you. Naruto's shoulders relaxed at that. Oh, that's good. He was glad he still had an excuse to hang out with her. He hadn't meant to learn tree walking so fast. For a moment, he'd thought that once he got it down, that'd be it. But if the Hyuga were really that good at taijutsu, Naruto grinned to himself. Then she could definitely keep helping him. Dinner continued pleasantly after that. Ino's annoyance disappeared fairly quickly, and Inoichi entertained the kids with stories about some of his craziest missions and students. By the time the sun had fully set, dinner was finished, dishes were washed, and the entire family plus Naruto had moved into the living room. Miko still had a promise to fulfill. All right, everyone settled in. Ino and Naruto nodded contentedly, while Inoichi dropped into his usual recliner. Good. Now, where were we? Miko hummed. What happened to them? You said they got wiped, didn't they? Naruto asked quietly. Miko nodded sadly. Unfortunately, yes. Their destruction actually spelled the beginning of the end for the Second Great Ninja War. The Uzumaki, by that point in the war, had grown a fearsome reputation. With their seals and chains, a squad of just 8 Uzumaki could decimate entire battalions and collapse battlefronts. Kimo, Kiri, and Idavi suffered the most, and in the end, banded together to wipe them out. Kiri initiated the attack, unleashing the three-tailed beast into the waters surrounding the Uzumaki's village, Yuzushio. Kimo and Idaue weren't part of the initial invasion force, but when they discovered the attack, they rushed to the battlefield with an army of over 2,000. Altogether, Yuzushio faced over 3,500 shinobi between the three nations. Naruto clenched his fists, a deep sense of injustice and unfairness rising in his heart. 3,000 shinobi just for one clan. Actually, 3,000 shinobi and a tailed beast too? How is that fair? Like, sure, his clan was really strong, but isn't that a little too excessive? How bad was it? Miko smiled bitterly. It was bad. 90% of the Uzumaki perished in the attack. The ones that were able to escape fled to all corners of the elemental nations, blending into society as much as they could. Naruto's shoulders fell, his eyes stinging with the unfairness of it all. So many of his people were killed in one battle. Mercifully, before he could fall too deep in his feelings, Miko distracted him by continuing. However, it was just as bad for the 3 attacking villages. His head snapped up with surprise as Miko's smile turned bittersweet. Even though the majority of the Uzumaki died out, Iwa, Kimo, and Kiri paid dearly for it. 75% of the invasion force was wiped out by the end of the battle. The 3 tails and 5 tails Jinchuriki were killed, while the 8 tails Jinchuriki was permanently wounded. Only the 4 tails Jinchuriki emerged relatively unscathed physically, though rumor has it that he still suffers mental scars from that horrible battle. Naruto's eyes widened, his heart trembling as he listened with a mix of horror and awe. So many shinobi, so many Jinchuriki dead. Even though Miko had made it a point to emphasize how strong his clan used to be, it was only now that he was starting to understand just how strong they were. They'd fought off 3 entire hidden villages and almost won. They killed 2 Jinchuriki and almost killed a 3rd, even when one of them let their beast out. But on the other hand, those numbers. He'd never really given much thought to how deadly being a shinobi might be. In his mind, he was saving princesses and learning cool jutsus. However, hearing about the battle, about how many people died, he felt an instinctive dread and revulsion at the thought of another battle like that. The academy had taught them that they would have to kill eventually, but he didn't think he could. Hearing his clans fall laid out, Naruto didn't know what to feel. He was sad, definitely. Angry, too, that the Uzumaki were attacked just because people were afraid of them. He was even afraid that if Kiri, Iwa, or Kimo found out about him, they would come after him next. But, despite the risk, he couldn't pretend he wasn't a Uzumaki. Even if he became a target, even if people were afraid of him, he didn't want to forget his clan, didn't want the world to forget them. And he knew the perfect way to honor them. Ani Miko, I want to learn sealing. Miko didn't seem the least bit surprised. She just smiled gently and took Naruto's hands in her own. Then you will learn. I have a few friends who might have some books on sealing that you can borrow. I'll ask them and get back to you tomorrow during training. In the meantime, we'll keep working on your chakra control. After all, if you ever want to unlock your clan's chakra chains, you'll need really good chakra control. Sound good? Naruto nodded firmly. Miko sat back in her chair as the storytelling came to an end, turning to look at a nearby wall clock. Seeing that it was nearing almost 10, she decided she did not want Naruto going home in the dark. He may be a very capable young man, but now she had an excuse to invite him to stay. All right, children, it's getting quite late. Naruto, I don't feel comfortable letting you go home alone this late. Would you want to stay the night? Naruto froze for a moment, the question pulling him from the swirling thoughts about his clan. He'd never been asked to stay the night before. He turned to look at Miko with an expression of disbelief and tentative hope. What? Really? Naruto stuttered. Inoichi, on the other hand, could only stare at his wife with despair and unwillingness. I thought we agreed to keep boys far away from our little Ino until she was at least 30, he complained to his heart. Ino, having stayed silent most of the night due to getting sucked into her mom's stories, caught the expression on her dad's face and had to bite her lip to suppress her laughter. She knew exactly what he was thinking because they'd had this argument countless times before. The Yamanaka matriarch ignored the reactions of her husband and daughter and smiled softly at Naruto, gently taking his hands. Yes, really, Naruto. We can make up the guest room for you, and you can go home in the morning. Does that sound okay? Naruto didn't know what to say. It had been a childhood dream of his to have a sleepover with a friend, but circumstances had long forced him to give it up. And now it was finally happening? He couldn't help the small, genuine but shaky smile that spread across his face, nodding jerkily. He didn't trust his voice not to crack if he answered with words. Miko's smile widened. Good. Inoichi, go set up the guest room. I'll look for something for Naruto to sleep in. Inoichi's head snapped towards his wife. You're really going to let that boy sleep under the same roof as our baby girl? And even if you are, at least don't make me contribute. His wide, pleading eyes seemed to say. In response, her own eyes narrowed, brutally crushing his hopes. Do it. His shoulders dropped, defeat hanging heavily from his frame as he reluctantly pushed himself out of his chair. Yes, dear. With a satisfied nod, Miko turned back to the kids as her expression returned to one of pleasantness. Ino, why don't you hop in the shower while I help Naruto find some pajamas? Sure. The preteen shrugged, lips still quirked up at the byplay between her parents. Before she left, she turned to her friend with a maliciously gleeful glint in her eyes. I hope you know you're not getting out of a makeover tonight, Naruto. Naruto tilted his head, oblivious to the danger his sanity was in. A makeover? What's that? Ino's smile widened, eyes sparkling with an unholy light. Oh, you'll see, she said ominously, finally walking up the stairs. The Uzumaki suddenly couldn't help but shudder, looking at Miko with sinking dread. It won't be as bad as her fashion lectures, will it? Miko laughed, but decided to ignore the question, standing up and taking the boy's hand instead as she led him to a hallway closet. I'm sorry, Naruto, but I don't think we have any boys' clothes in your size here anymore. Inoichi donated all of his childhood clothes to the orphanage after the Nine-Tails attack. Are you alright with wearing some of Ino's old clothes? Bravely pushing past the dread at her non-answer, Naruto smiled reassuringly. I don't mind. I can just do this. Sexy jutsu. With a puff of smoke, his newly named Naruto form appeared, looking much like his usual self, only feminized. Oh, I'd forgotten you could do that. Yes, that'll help immensely. You're a little bit broader in the shoulders as a boy, but you seem like you're just the right size as a girl. Give me 1 second, Miko replied as she began rummaging through the various boxes in the closet. Naruto got a glimpse of some of their contents: thick wool blankets, bed sheets, quilts, baby clothes, until finally she pulled out a pair of some nice flowery pajama pants and a spaghetti strap top. He was not ashamed to admit they did look pretty nice according to his budding new fashion sense. There you go. I'll wash your jumpsuit tonight while you wear these. And if you find you like these pajamas, you can keep them. Kami knows Ino will never wear them again, Miko said wryly, handing over the clothes. The pajama pants were a nice navy blue color with flowering vines crawling up along the legs. The top was a simple but sturdy reddish-purple shirt with thin shoulder straps and no design on it. It wasn't his usual orange color scheme, but thanks to Ino, he'd gained a new appreciation for other colors. Red and blue were a close second to his favorite orange color. Thank you, Ani Miko. Also, thank you for telling me about my clan. Now I can rub in stupid Sasuke's face that my clan was much better than his. Miko gave a strained smile, but said nothing else. Explaining what happened to the Uchiha would be too long a story for this late at night. She placed a hand on Naruto's head, ruffling his hair affectionately. You're welcome, Naruto. You deserve to know. Now, come on. Let me show you the guest room. An hour later, Naruto was stepping out of the shower dressed in Ino's old pajamas. He had his hair wrapped up in a towel like he'd seen some women do at the bathhouse. He tossed his jumpsuit into the hamper by the bathroom door and started making his way to the guest room. Unfortunately, he was almost immediately snatched up by the terrifying hands of a certain blonde fashionista and dragged into said blonde's room. Before he could even yelp in protest, her voice piped up. Great, you're done. We can get started. Naruto turned to look at her as she closed the door behind them, eyes wary and alert. Get started on what? Do you mean that makeover thing you were talking about earlier? Ino didn't answer right away, purposefully striding across the room to dig into her vanity for her supplies. She set aside anything that was relying on skin tone and just grabbed the basics. Eyeliner, eyeshadow, blush, lip gloss, mascara, lash curlers, even some shinobi-grade face paint in case she was in the mood for designs. When she turned around, Naruto saw the makeup in her hands and instantly understood. Surprisingly, the dread he'd been feeling suddenly disappeared. To anyone that knew him, they would know he was no stranger to face paint. In fact, in a few days, when he was supposed to get his shinobi ID picture taken, he planned on going in full kabuki face paint just for the laughs. It was an art he'd always wanted to get into, but never really had any way to learn. Oh, you know how to do all that face paint stuff? Naruto asked with interest, freezing the Yamanaka in place. The predatory gleam in her eye died, and she tilted her head in confusion. She'd expected him to fight her on this the way he did for her fashion lectures. But why did he actually seem interested this time? Yeah, most girls know about face paint. I thought you'd run as soon as you saw all this. Naruto shrugged nonchalantly, stuffing her hands in her pajamas pockets. I have face paint, too. I can do some pretty good kabuki makeup, but I couldn't find any books to teach me anything else. Ino stared at him, yet another puzzle piece slotting into place as her understanding of her friend grew. Well then, come over here and I'll teach you what I can. No shinobi really uses full face paint anymore because it's too conspicuous, but I'll teach you the more subtle art of makeup. Since you plan on using your sexy jutsu so often, it'd be good if you knew how to use makeup anyway. Naruto grinned, walking over enthusiastically and sitting down in the chair in front of Ino's vanity. Sounds good. What's first? Naruto looked at herself in the vanity's mirror after Ino had finished, eyes wide with surprise. How could such a small amount of face paint make her look so much prettier? She spent almost 3 whole years tweaking and making minor adjustments to her transformation jutsu to look as good as possible. Yet a little makeup, and she could achieve the same thing. Whoa, she whispered, the faint powdered blush hiding her very real one underneath. Meanwhile, Ino was grinning with satisfaction, nose in the air. Right. Now you look like a proper kunoichi. Naruto gently touched her face, admiring her favorite part of her new look. Thanks to Ino's incredible work with eyeliner, her eyes no longer looked so narrow and squinted. Of course, she still had a habit of narrowing her eyes, but seeing how much softer it made her face, she'd be looking into breaking that particular habit. The black of the eyeliner really contrasted the blue in her eyes, and the red eyeshadow gave her a strangely exotic look that Naruto absolutely loved. Ino had even added in a handful of fake freckles across the bridge of her nose just for fun. Man, it sucks that this is so good. I don't want to take it off. Naruto mumbled, her pink, glossy lips twitching into a frown. Ino shrugged. I can put it back on in the morning if you really want. But won't it look weird as a boy? I mean, I don't think so, but if you do, just stay as a girl tomorrow. Naruko's frown twisted with confusion, turning to her friend and tilting her head. What do you mean? Won't girls beat me up if they see me using my sexy jutsu? Sakura always does that. Now was Ino's turn to frown, her eyes going flat. Naruto, they beat you up because you turned into a naked girl. Naruko froze slightly, her brain stalling as she recalled every incident in which turning into a girl led to her being beaten up, and she was right. She only ever got beat up if she transformed naked. But Sakura beats me up even if my sexy jutsu still has clothes on. Ino huffed, a frown forming on her face at the reminder. That's Sakura's problem, not yours. She shouldn't be hitting you at all. For a moment, Naruko went silent. She could have been going out as Naruko for years if she wanted to, and Kami knows she had wanted to. All those especially irritable days where she'd pranked nearly half of Konoha just to let out her frustrations weren't even necessary in the first place. She could have just transformed anytime she wanted. She deflated, shoulders sagging with resignation. Oh, so it's okay to go out as Naruko, she asked with tentative hope, turning back to the mirror to look at herself. Ino's eyes lit up at the name. So you decided to use that terrible name anyway? Naruko blushed, grumbling softly. I just couldn't think of a better one. Ino laughed, but smiled softly. Of course it's okay to go out as Naruko if you want to. Just make sure you have clothes on, yeah? Naruko huffed with faux annoyance, but smiled. Okay, thanks, Ino. You're a good friend. Ino's smile turned smug. Aren't I? The next morning, after each taking their showers and Naruko dressing in her now clean jumpsuit, Ino did as promised and redid her makeup. Only it didn't look as good as last night due to, in the Yamanakas' words, that utterly ridiculous jumpsuit. This is all I can afford. Naruko grumbled defensively. All the other shopkeepers raise the prices every time I try to buy something new. Ino gasped, her eyes narrowing with only slightly exaggerated anger. Oh, hell no. Not on my watch. Come here. With lightning reflexes, she grabbed Naruko's wrist and dragged her down to the kitchen. Miko was, naturally, busy preparing breakfast while Inoichi was nursing a mug of coffee and reading from some file. Mom, a travesty has occurred. Naruto, tell her, Ino demanded, lightly pulling her friend to the forefront. Miko and Inoichi turned to the kids, the matriarch internally cooing at the extremely well-done makeover of their guest. What's the matter? Before she could gather her courage to explain, Ino got impatient. The shopkeepers are intentionally raising the prices every time Naruto shops, so he can only afford those monstrosities of a jumpsuit. Miko frowned and Inoichi's eyes narrowed. They both looked over his clothing and felt a similar, but enraging suspicion as to the reason. Naruto, be honest with me. Do you like those jumpsuits? Naruko fidgeted uncomfortably, lowering her gaze as she picked at the fraying hem of her jacket sleeve. Well, they're my favorite color, she muttered softly. Miko's eyes hardened. Inoichi met his wife's stare and nodded, silently promising he'd look into it. Naruto, after breakfast, I'll take you to some shops I know won't turn you away like that. Sound good? Naruko's eyes widened as she looked up at her auntie. Really? I thought I'd have to use my hinge to go shopping from now on. Miko nodded sharply. Some old friends run those shops. They'll treat you fairly. The Uzumaki couldn't help but smile, gratitude in her eyes. That was, until she remembered something and her eyes widened. Oh wait, Hinata-chan and I were supposed to train this morning. Just invite her along, Miko suggested, not noticing the way Ino's expression flickered briefly. Oh, that's a good idea. Just as Naruko moved to do just that, a hand on her shoulder stopped her. Later, Naruto, at least have breakfast first. It was Inoichi. She found herself a little surprised that he was the one to stop her, considering he mostly just went along with Auntie Miko. What? Why do you look so shocked? Ino and Miko giggled, while Naruko, just shook her head and sat down at the table. No reason. The shopping trip that morning had been the most fun Naruto had ever had buying clothes. Where before it had felt like a chore she hated but had to do, Ino and Hinata made it much more enjoyable, especially when they decided to try on some new outfits with her. And if some of those new outfits made Naruto's stomach feel all weird, well, no one had to know but her. Aside from that, Naruto found herself pleasantly surprised that Ani Miko hadn't been lying. Every single shop they visited did, indeed, treat her with the kindness and patience typically afforded to customers that were not her. It was a strange but welcome feeling to be treated just like anyone else. Miko even pointed out places she could shop for groceries or shinobi gear that wouldn't turn her away. She made a mental note to spend her entire first mission pay on groceries she'd never been allowed to buy. Maybe she'd even learn to cook like she always wanted. By the time the sun had reached its peak, Naruto found herself carrying several sealing scrolls of nothing but clothes and an updated kunai and shuriken set, with Miko footing the entire bill. Not that Naruto didn't fight her on it. She had made sure the younger girl had 2 entire wardrobes of both boy and girl clothes. From really nice casual outfits to some much-needed shinobi sturdy ones. She even got a really nice cloak/haori she planned to wear on her first mission out of the village. Lunch that afternoon saw a rare change-up. Somehow, Miko and Ino managed to convince the ramen-obsessed Naruto to try out something other than ramen for once. Naruto fought valiantly, espousing the virtues of the food of the gods and arguing there was nothing better, but was eventually forced to concede when Miko promised to teach him a kick-ass ninjutsu in exchange. Thus, for the first time in her life, she skipped Tuchi's restaurant and ate at Yakiniku instead. She would never admit that she found their food just as good as Ichiraku's, even if she still preferred ramen. Ino would never let her hear the end of it. After lunch, Hinata sadly had to go back home to continue her clan training. Despite their mutual disappointment, Naruto reassured her that their training was still on for tomorrow, and she'd do her best to make up for the rest day today. Hinata had smiled, nodded with barely contained enthusiasm, before she left the group for home. For the remainder of that afternoon, Miko continued their evening training routine until they collapsed at sunset. The next 4 days passed in much the same fashion. Naruto and Hinata continued to meet in the morning for training, had lunch, and got to know each other better before he would walk her back home and get ready for Ani Miko's training. After Miko's brutal training, where she forcefully corrected every single bit of damage his teachers did to his education, they would return to Ino's house where he would often join them for dinner. On the 5th day, the day before team assignments, Naruto and Ino were released from Miko's training and given the chance to rest before their Jonin test. She knew how tough those tests could be, and the last thing she wanted was for them to potentially fail due to not resting properly after such rigorous training. Naruto might be fine with his freakishly energetic body, but her daughter definitely wouldn't be. And on the 6th day, standing before the academy door were 3 completely different kunoichi ready to take the ninja world by storm. Out of the 3 kunoichi, surprisingly, Naruto was the one most nervous about entering. Not because she didn't think she'd fail the Jonin test, something Ino had clued her into the day before, but because of something else entirely. She hadn't lived in this female form for very long. The only time she ever spent longer than a few hours in it, she'd been around friends she was absolutely sure wouldn't judge her. And while she'd never been one who cared too much about what people thought of her, a lifetime of being hated had taught her the consequences of caring too much about others' opinions. She couldn't help but feel a bit self-conscious this time. Fortunately, Naruto was an expert at pushing down uncomfortable feelings and promptly shove her nerves and insecurities into the darkest pit of her mind, forcing a grin. "We're here. We're finally going to become shinobi," she shouted, fist clenching with anticipation. That is, until a glare from a certain blonde-haired friend caused her to falter and correct herself. "I mean kunoichi, definitely kunoichi," she stammered. Ino huffed, but nodded with satisfaction. Meanwhile, Hinata was stifling her giggles. Is it still weird for you to say, Narrated, Naruko-chan? The Hyuga asked, a small smile remaining on her face. The lack of a stutter left a brief sensation of pride, her lip twitching to keep from smiling over it. Over the past few days, Hinata had gotten over quite a bit of her previous meekness due to sheer osmosis of Naruko's exuberance and Ino's sass. It was then that the two blondes discovered that while nowhere near as sassy and sarcastic as Ino, the previously meek Hyuga had a surprisingly sharp bite when she wanted to. Naruko huffed, crossed her bare arms over her stylish new outfit as she answered. So weird. It's only been a few days, but I'm still not used to it. Ino smirked. Well, you can't exactly call yourself a shinobi or a boy when you're clearly a girl right now. Can you? Get used to it. Now, come on. If we don't hurry, we'll be late. Without waiting for a reply, Ino walked ahead. Naruko rolled her eyes playfully, but followed after her bossy friend, Hinata snickering as she did the same. As soon as they reached their homeroom class, Ino slid open the door with an audible clack. Expectedly, every head in the room turned towards the door and caught sight of the trio. Ino looked mostly the same as before the week-long break, with the exception of some barely noticeable increased definition in her physique. Her hair was braided into a crown to keep it out of the way in battle, but other than that, she looked the same. Hinata had several students gawking at her transformation. Ever since that first she decided to talk to Naruko, she'd taken to wearing slightly more form-fitting clothing, though still obviously modest. Her white and purple jacket remained a staple of her attire, though rather than zipping it up like she did with her old beige jacket, she left the front open. It was way too hot in Konoha to be constantly zipped up. Now, while most of the class was fairly surprised by the physique-shy little Hinata had been hiding underneath her jacket, it was the appearance of the third member that held the most attention of their classmates. Now, by this point, every single class member had seen Naruto's infamous sexy jutsu. It was practically a staple for whenever he wanted to get out of doing something. But to see Naruto in his sexy jutsu, wearing clothes, and those clothes not being his signature orange jumpsuit, it stunned the class enough that the entire room fell silent. Most of the boys looked confused on what to feel. A large portion were absolutely convinced Naruko was probably the prettiest girl in class. No, in the whole school right now. The rest were feeling angry that they couldn't disagree. Wearing a sleeveless, turtleneck crop top that clung to her like a second skin, a chainmail shirt underneath, and black spandex shorts under a gray apron skirt, she looked every bit the deadly but sexy kunoichi she was trying to be. The girls, on the other hand, were more straightforward in their reactions. Some were shocked, indignant, extremely jealous, or a mixture of all three. Those girls that prided themselves on being the prettiest, most popular girls in school were feeling the humiliation they inflicted on countless other classmates. When Naruko noticed those looks of jealousy, envy, and humiliation, she couldn't help but smirk, silently preening that her hard work perfecting this form was paying off. Naruto, what are you doing here, and why do you look like that? Didn't you fail? Do you think your dumb, sexy jutsu will trick Irika-sensei into thinking you passed? Kiba's obnoxious voice said, his provocative words dampened slightly by the subtle pink in his cheeks. Naruko scoffed and rolled her eyes, ignoring the horrifying image of Kiba having a crush on her. Oh, shut up, Kiba. Are you blind as well as stupid? Can't you see this headband? I passed too, she shouted back, pointing at the black ninja headband tied around her neck. Who are you calling stupid, dead last? Big words for a failure, Kiba shouted, shooting to his feet with indignation. I'm calling you stupid, dog breath. I may be a failure, but at least I'm not a flea bag. Oh, you want to go? Bring it. I'll kick your ass so bad, they'll send you back to the academy. Ino sighed, her head tilting up towards the ceiling as she begged for patience, before she grabbed Naruko's shoulder and sent her harshest glare towards Kiba. Both of you shut up. You're supposed to be ninjas now, and you're acting like children. Grow up. Naruko snapped her mouth shut, Kiba doing the same, though they both continued glaring at each other. Eventually, Naruto huffed and turned away, not wanting to anger her friend. Fine. Sorry, Ino-chan, Naruto mumbled. A pleasant warmth filled Ino's stomach at the affectionate honorific, still not having gotten used to her using it yet. Kiba said nothing, instead just turning around and continuing to chat with his seatmates. Naruto moved to stuff her hands in her pockets grudgingly until she remembered these damn shorts didn't have pockets. Why don't any girl clothes have pockets? Where am I supposed to put my hands? She growled quietly, hugging her elbows instead. Ino grinned with schadenfreude, savoring the karma of watching her friend deal with the age-old issues of womanhood. Welcome to womanhood. Hinata giggled, surprisingly not seeming very put off despite the loud argument. Why do you think I always wear sweaters? She asked, stuffing her hands into her jacket pockets for emphasis. Ino scoffed and bumped her shoulder playfully, leading her friends to the last open row of 3 seats. Because your unfair body would grab too much attention and you hate attention? Hinata's smile didn't waver, even if her cheeks colored a light pink. Well, that's one reason, but mostly it's because of the pockets. Naruto grumbled as she took her seat in the middle. When I'm done here, I'm going to look for a better apron skirt. Who the hell thought it was a good idea to put fake pockets? That's just evil. Ino immediately perked up at the mention of shopping. I know just the place. For the next several minutes, the 3 kunoichi continued making small talk while they waited for Irika-sensei to arrive. Students continued to arrive, but it wasn't until Sakura, the last graduate to arrive, sat down that the bell rang and the chunin finally made his appearance. Naruto was immediately hyper-focused on her teacher. Finally, it was time to find out who her teammates and Jonin-sensei were going to be. Hopefully, she got put in a team with either or both Hinata and Ino. At the very least, please don't put her on a team with Sasuke. That would be the worst. Naruto tuned out Irika-sensei's boring congratulatory speech, only snapping to full attention when he began listing out the team assignments. Team 1, Kitagawa Yuga, Suzuki Tomo, Taniguchi Yusuke, led by Jonamori Jin. Team 2, Shimura Kasumi, Hasegawa Ami, Yamato Fuki, led by Jonin Hamada Kiriko. Teams 3, 4, 5, and 6 were called out without even a single name she recognized. Her patience was running thin, her excitement slowly strangling what little remained. Ino noticed immediately and began rubbing her back in soothing motions. At this point, it was the only thing keeping her in her seat. By the time Team 6 was called, she realized they were pairing up all the civilian-born kids together, which meant she'd be paired with clan kids. That wasn't bad if she got paired with Ino or Hinata. Heck, even if she got paired with Kiba, she could make it work, but she had a bad feeling she'd be paired with him. Naruto glanced out of the corner of her eye at her potential teammate, scowling at seeing his broody, uncaring expression. She could already tell he'd be the type to leave her for dead if he had to. And since he was Uchiha-sama, and she was the demon brat, no one would question him. Naruto's brooding was interrupted by the sound of her name. Team 7, Uzumaki Naruto. Her focus snapped forward, anticipation rising as she waited to hear who her teammates would be. Haruno Sakura. Naruto's instinctive joy surged through her chest as she mentally celebrated for getting the one teammate she'd been hoping for, before a strange twinge in her chest brought her back to earth. She was happy, immensely happy, that she was on Sakura's team, but why wasn't she as happy as she thought she'd be? If this had been just last week, she would have been literally leaping with joy. So why? She turned to look at her teammate in confusion only for the answer to smack her in the face. Sakura was slumped at the shoulders, visibly dejected. The answer hit her suddenly. Sakura did not want to be on a team with her. The joy she felt drained out of her, and she leaned back in her chair as that realization became resignation. Thanks to her absolutely amazing week with Ino-chan, Ani Miko, Hinata-chan, and even Inoichi-san, she'd forgotten how much everyone disliked her. Even Sakura didn't really like her much. Her chest ached slightly at the reminder. Thankfully, before she could embarrass herself and start crying, she felt Ino and Hinata grab each of her hands, squeezing them tightly. Naruko looked up at them and felt her heart lift at the gentle smiles on their faces. Well, that was okay. Even if Sakura didn't like her, at least she had Hinata-chan and Ino-chan. And then the final blow came. An Uchiha Sasuke, led by Jonin Hatake Kakashi. Her head smashed into the desk with a loud thud, Sakura's cheer ringing slightly louder. Yes. Damn it. Why do I have to be in a team with him? Naruko groaned, just barely resisting the urge to smash her head into the desk again. Ino smiled weakly, looking torn between her Sasuke standard jealousy and disappointment at not being on her new friend's team. Hinata also seemed disappointed, but she squeezed her hand tighter. It's okay, Naruko-chan. I'm sure it won't be that bad. And even if we're not on a team, we'll still be friends. Hearing Hinata's adorably earnest words, Naruko sighed but smiled slightly. Yeah, I guess so. And who knows? Maybe we'll get a sensei that'll stop his bastard behavior. She must have said that a bit too loud because she heard that broody bastard's infamous HN. Or maybe he'll see what a loser you are and send you back to the academy. Before Naruko could snap back, Irika cleared his throat and sent them both a warning glare. Sasuke humphed once again and turned away. Naruko deflated but leveled a glare at the back of Sasuke's head, vowing to herself to pay him back for that insult somehow. Team 8. Aburame Shino, Hyuga Hinata, Inazuka Kiba, led by Jonin Kurinayu. Naruko winced and flipped their hands, so she was holding Hinata's instead. Bad luck, Hinata-chan. Shino isn't bad, but Kiba? Once I learn to make seals, I'll make you something to block out loud sounds and smells, she promised. Hinata smacked her hand with mock disapproval, even as she tried to suppress her giggles. He's not that bad. Naruko gave her a look of exaggerated pity. Poor Hina-chan, you've already been tricked. Hinata couldn't fight off her giggles that time, infecting both Naruko and Ino. Girls, pay attention, Irika shouted, his warning eyes once again settling more firmly on Naruko. Sorry, sensei, they all chorused, nearly breaking down into giggles once more. Irika sighed and called the last team. All three girls returned their attention to their sensei, ignoring the strange looks their classmates were giving them. After all, it was probably really shocking to see Hinata get called out by a teacher when she was so quiet before. And even more shocking to see Naruto fit in so well with girls when he used to run away from him before. Team 9 is still in circulation. Team 10, Yamanaka, Ino, Narashikamu, Akimichi Choji, led by Jonin Sarutobi Asuma. That's all for team assignments. Now, before I call your senseis to come pick you up, I have a few last-minute announcements. This immediately sent the room into a murmur. Due to an incident involving a former instructor, the Hokage has seen fit to assign an extra Chunin or above-level shinobi to oversee every 3 groups of teams. As a result of this, it will be as if instead of there being 9 4-man teams, you will be closer to something like 3 12-man teams. Teams 1, 2, and 3 will make up one group. Teams 4, 5, and 6 will make up the second. And teams 7, 8, and 10 will make up the third. Your Jonin instructors will introduce you to the overseer. Now, with that out of the way, Irika flared his chakra. Follow your new instructors when they call your team. Naruko's eyes lit up, exchanging excited smiles with both Ino and Hinata. That means we'll still be training together and maybe even take missions together. Ino grinned, her previous disappointment disappearing. Awesome. I don't know why they're doing this now, but I'm not complaining. Hinata nodded enthusiastically. Me either. Before they could gush any longer, the door of the classroom opened and a man with wild black hair and a green-haired kunoichi in a modified Miko outfit entered the room. Team 1, follow me, said the man, picking out his students with his eyes and leading them out. Team 2, with me. The woman followed up, waiting for her new genin to reach her before she led them out. The pattern continued in the same vein. Various unfamiliar jonin entered the room and called for their teams, leading them out to conduct what Ino, Naruto, and Hinata knew was their jonin or apprehension tests. The first 6 teams left in order, but the next jonin surprised them when she called for Team 8. Team 8, let's go, said a beautiful red-eyed woman. Hinata perked up joyfully, having just realized who her jonin sensei was. She gave one last squeeze to Naruto's hand and smiled warmly at Ino. I'll see you after. Of course, Ino promised, Naruto nodding her head in agreement. Hinata smiled and followed her teammates out the door, giving her friends one last wave before she left. Well, that's nice. Hinata's told me how nice Kurenai is, so I'm glad she's her sensei. Naruto nodded in agreement. Yeah, I met her once when I was dropping Hinata-chan off at home. She's really nice. A tall, broad-shouldered man entered the room next with a cigarette on his lip. Team 10. Ino sighed, having wanted to avoid her responsibilities for a little while longer. Well, that's me. I guess I'll see you after, Naruto. We probably won't finish by lunch, but bring Hinata to our place for dinner, if you can, okay? Naruto grinned and gave a salute. You got it, Ino-chan. I'll see you later. Ino smiled fondly before she followed her lifelong friends / pains in her neck out with her new sensei. Now alone with Sasuke and Sakura, Naruto sighed and could only pray their sensei would get here soon. Sitting in a room with people who hated her would be way more uncomfortable now that she knew what it felt like to be around people who liked her. The silence that followed Team 10's exit quickly became tense and awkward for both Sakura and Naruto. Sasuke didn't feel it, too lost in his own revenge fantasies to notice, but the tension between the two girls was impossible for them to miss. Naruto tried to ignore it, pretending not to notice the confused, questioning looks Sakura kept sending her as she began picking at her orange-painted nails. Meanwhile, Sakura forewent her usual Uchiha pestering as she tried to figure out what was going on with her most annoying headache. Was this another prank? Some kind of weird social experiment? No, Naruto wasn't acting like he was waiting for a reaction, and he definitely wasn't smart enough to conduct any kind of experiment. So why was he? She opened her mouth to ask, but chickened out when he intentionally turned away from her. That, more than anything, rang a few alarm bells in her mind. In the past, she would have celebrated this strange new distance between them, but for some reason, now it made her uncomfortable. When she heard she was being put on a team with Naruto, her chest had filled with dread as she imagined dealing with his annoying exuberance and relentless date requests every single day until she became a chunin and was allowed to leave the team. However, Naruto hadn't said a word to her at all. Instead, it seemed like he was following Sasuke's example and trying to ignore both him and Sakura. It was weird. For almost an hour, tense silence kept her from asking the burning questions in her mind, until eventually, she reached the end of her patience. Naruto, what happened to you? Is this a prank or something? Why are you transformed, and why are you ignoring me? Naruto sighed, a mix of dread and relief filling her stomach as the stalemate was finally broken. She tried to prepare herself to have this conversation, but now that it was here, she really wanted their sensei to interrupt them right now. No, it's not a prank. And I'm not ignoring you. Well, I am. But that's just because I thought you wanted me to leave you alone, she replied evenly, voice flat. That only confused Sakura more. Since when did Naruto actually listen to her? I mean, I do, but why? You never listened to me before, so why now? And you didn't answer my question. She frowned, head tilting with genuine confusion. Naruto shrugged. I don't know. Just felt like it this time. A tick formed in Sakura's forehead. So you could have listened to me this entire time and chose not to? As for why I'm transformed, I also just felt like it. Me, Ino-chan, and Hinata-chan did a lot of work making my sexy jutsu look good, and I wanted to show it off. Sakura's eyes widened with shock at the familiar way he talked about Ino and Hinata. Since when did those three become such good friends? And they're already that close? What's going on? She briefly turned to look at Sasuke and saw that, despite seeming as uninterested as ever, his ear was turned towards them, listening. I'm so confused. What do you mean you, Ino, and Hinata work hard on it? Since when did you guys become friends? And just because you felt like it? Why is this the first time you've stayed transformed like this? Sakura was starting to get a bit loud now, Naruto's vague answers only making her more curious and confused. Naruto sighed again. Despite how fun it was to mess with her, it was probably best to just give her a more detailed explanation, or this could go on for hours. She really just wanted to get this over with. Yes, I'm friends with Ino and Hinata. Ino was the first one to help me perfect my sexy jutsu. She even taught me how to act like a girl and how to do girl stuff like makeup and dressing up. Hinata and I became friends after I asked her to help me train my chakra control. She's a really good teacher, and her Byakugan was a big help for helping me learn to control it. Naruto explained, lips thinning. As for why I'm transformed right now, I really did just like it and felt like being Naruto today. We worked really hard on it over the past week, and like I said, I wanted to show it off. Oh, also, that's the name Ino gave this form, so while I look like this, call me Naruto. Naruto grinned a bit stiffly. I couldn't think of a better one. The full explanation left Sakura in silence as she absorbed the information. Sasuke did the same, though quickly discarded it as irrelevant. Who cared what that doe was doing? All that mattered was training. Naruto watched Sakura's face cycle through several different expressions, mostly confusion, though she noticed the barely concealed interest before finally nodding. She understood everything in principle, but when put together, there was too much shocking information for her to process all at once. With nothing more to say, hours passed mostly in silence as the three soon-to-be genin waited for their sensei. Occasionally, Sakura would try to strike up a conversation with Sasuke in order to get back to normal, only to get immediately shut out with grunts of dismissal. Eventually, the weight started grating on Naruto. She fidgeted constantly, legs tapping, fingers nodding, even rocking in her chair slightly as she tried to let out her boundless energy. It was only made worse by the company she was stuck with. Despite the earlier conversation, she still hadn't figured out how exactly to act with Sakura anymore now that she knew how she really felt about her. And talking to Sasuke was bound to either get her shut out like Sakura was or start a fight she wasn't in the mood to fight. Eventually, it became too much for her. Naruto had to move. She quickly stood up and began pacing around the room, silently cursing herself for leaving her Fuinjutsu primer at home this morning. Calligraphy wasn't exactly fun, but it was calming enough that it would have made the wait way more bearable. The pacing helped a little bit, but nowhere near enough to let her fully settle. Eventually, she decided to get a little training in and hopefully let off steam by practicing her chakra control. She casually stepped onto the wall and began walking. She walked up to the ceiling, stepped onto it, and walked across it before finishing the lap down the other wall. To split her focus, she pulled out a kunai and began spinning it in her hand, just like Onimiko taught her. If she ever wanted to use her clan's chakra chains, she needed to be able to multitask. She wasn't great at doing that yet, occasionally stumbling as she focused too much on one task before correcting herself, but she was getting there. So focused was she on her training that she didn't notice her teammates' shock. Sakura was openly gaping at her, while Sasuke had stopped fantasizing and locked his burning gaze onto her pacing form. It took 2 entire revolutions of the room before she was snapped back to the present by a loud shout. Naruto, how are you doing that? Where did you learn that? Sakura's sudden shout made her flinch slightly, though she managed to keep her chakra firmly stuck to the ceiling despite her surprise. She paused as she processed the question and looked up at Sakura. Huh. Oh, Hinata-chan taught me. This is the next chakra control exercise after leaf sticking. I had too much chakra for the leaf sticking exercise, that's why I had so much trouble with it. So she taught me this exercise instead. This is much easier. Naruko's praise for her friend halted for a moment as a thought came to her, one she hesitated to bring up even though it would fix the awkwardness between them. Part of her wanted to ignore it, still feeling a bit hurt about Sakura's reaction earlier and wanting to be petty. But they were teammates now. If they couldn't get along now, before they were officially even a team, they wouldn't pass the Jonin test and would get sent back to the academy. She'd worked too hard to get here. She was not going back to the academy. If she could help it. Sigh. Fine. I can teach you if you want. It's supposed to be easier for people with smaller chakra pools to master. You won't be able to do it as long as I can, but it's supposed to help make jutsu easier to cast. Also, I just told you, call me Naruko when I'm transformed like this. Sakura opened her mouth, an instinctual, brutal rejection on her lips before she caught herself. She'd gotten so used to rejecting her that even though Naruko, his offer seemed genuine, she'd almost shut her down for no reason. She swallowed her initial reaction and took a deep breath, narrowing her eyes at Naruko as she tried to suss out any ulterior motives. She stared at the blonde's annoyingly honest face and frowned contemplatively when she noticed nothing but genuineness. Finally, she decided to give her a shot. Sure, why not? Naruko smiled weakly, her shoulders sagging with relief. Deciding she wanted to be a bit fancy, she nonchalantly released her chakra from the ceiling and let herself fall. A quick kick of her leg let her maneuver herself mid-air and land perfectly on her feet. Naturally, being a cool shinobi, she didn't acknowledge her sick moves, even if she internally preened at her success, and immediately started explaining the tree-walking exercise. Cool. So first you wanna... Unfortunately, before she could get very far, Sasuke suddenly stood up with an audible slap on the desk. Both girls turned to look at him, confusion twisting their expressions as he turned to face them. Naruko almost reflexively sneered as they locked eyes before she caught herself. As much as that team's arrogance really got on her nerves, becoming friends with Hinata had taught her a little about patience. She still didn't like him and likely never would, but deep down, she knew a lot of their fights in the academy had been because she'd started it and insulted him first. Heck, if the Naruto of today went to school with the Naruto of last week, she'd kick his ass if he talked to her the way he talked to Sasuke. What do you want, team? Sasuke narrowed his eyes at her. Teach me. Naruko bristled, her teeth clacking shut as she fought her own instinct not to instantly reject him. That entitled tone, no, demand really made her want to punch him in his stupid mouth. Why should she teach him if he was going to act like it'd be a gift to teach him? Unfortunately, as much as it pained her to admit, the same reason she wanted to teach Sakura also applied to Sasuke. They were teammates now. They needed to get along if they wanted to be good shinobi, but she wasn't going to let him get away with talking to her like that. Ask nicely, or you can screw the hell off. Why the hell would I teach anyone who talks to me like that? Sakura frowned and was about to start shouting with indignation, but one look from Naruko was enough to forestall it, the sheer surprise of receiving a look like that from her catching her off guard. Sasuke glared at her, fists clenching as he tried to intimidate her into backing down and listening to him. When she stood firm, he frowned and glared harder, but acquiesced. Teach me, please. The please was ground out between clenched teeth, making a petty little part of her heart shudder with joy, but Naruko ignored that for the sake of their new team and nodded. Okay, first things first, lay down on the ground in front of the wall and place your feet against it. You need to channel chakra to your feet and figure out how much chakra you need to stick to the wall. If you use too little, your feet will slip, but if you use too much, it'll push you away. Hitaki Kakashi arrived at the academy early to try to get a feel for the personalities of his potential students. It was something he did every time Lord Third tried to saddle him with a genin team, and so far, it had been an excellent way to judge whether they were worth being shinobi or were just liabilities. So it was after reading the academy profiles of his new genin that Kakashi fully expected this team to be yet another failure. Which was a shame because Lord Third should have known pairing Naruto and Sasuke on the same team was a bad idea. They could barely stand to be in the same room with each other, let alone be expected to cooperate in life-or-death missions. If they somehow managed to work together enough to pass his test, he'd have to run them through some pretty extensive team bonding exercises just to make sure they wouldn't abandon each other on a mission. He was already dreading it. Shaking away his distracted thoughts, Kakashi finally settled into a nearby tree outside the classroom and enhanced his hearing with chakra. Hopefully, Kami was merciful and didn't make his team too dysfunctional. 3 hours later, he learned more than enough about their characters and the surprising change in one student's gender, and was about ready to reveal himself to collect them when Naruto suddenly began walking on walls. For a moment, the Jonin froze, having not expected Naruto, of all people, to shock him with knowledge she shouldn't have yet. According to her academy profile, chakra control and manipulation were supposed to be her worst subjects. So where and how did she learn the tree-walking exercise? Thankfully, before his suspicion had a chance to grow, the question was answered. Hyuga Hinata taught her, one of the best students in the class at chakra control, and someone he knew had a very positive opinion of Naruto. Kakashi relaxed, but made a mental note to keep track of her training speed. Who knows what else she learned and from whom? Deciding to wait just a little longer to see how this played out, he was once again surprised when Sasuke demanded Naruto teach him what she was doing. That wasn't unexpected. Sasuke's profile told him he was the kind of person to pursue any avenue of strength, no matter the source. No, what caught him off guard was Naruto's reaction to that demand. He'd fully expected her to snap back and outright refuse just out of principle. In fact, he expected this to devolve into a fight and had tensed up, ready to intervene if it came to that. Instead, he watched his sensei's child painfully swallow back her instinctive reaction, clench her fists, and take a deep, calming breath. Even outside the classroom, he could feel the tension inside. And then, in the calmest, firmest voice he'd ever heard from her, she forced him to either ask nicely or screw the hell off. Kakashi nearly laughed, even as his chest tightened. For a moment, he saw the shadow of his old sensei stretch behind her. That tone, that stance, that same uncompromising expression on her face. She was the exact picture of the fourth Hokage, though the vulgarity at the end was all Aunt Kushina. Looks like she did inherit something from Minato-sensei, after all. Not wanting to interrupt the sudden team bonding exercise Naruto unintentionally instigated, he settled in to wait a little while longer. I did it, Sakura chirped happily, standing firmly on the wall. Naruto grinned, as if it were expected, and gave her a thumbs up. I told you. Now, you just need to practice sticking to walls as long as you can. Hinata-chan says that it helps build bigger chakra reserves. I don't have to worry about that, but you do. Sakura nodded, making a mental note to ask about that last part when she had a chance, and began walking further up the wall and onto the ceiling. Sasuke, meanwhile, huffed with frustration at seeing Sakura succeed. Despite Naruto saying that people with smaller reserves had it easier with this exercise, it was still a blow to his pride to be surpassed by someone he considered so much weaker than him. He determinedly turned back to focus on the exercise, but didn't notice Naruto catching his expression. The temporary teacher suppressed a mocking grin, having to remind herself that she was trying to be a good teammate. Instead, she set aside her pettiness and channeled Ani Miko to offer some advice. You're getting too frustrated. The more you try to force it, the harder your chakra will be to control. Calm down and try again. Sasuke grunted, face twisting with distaste at taking orders from her, but did as instructed. She knew more than him about tree walking, and until he mastered this dumb exercise, he'd swallow his pride for now. Pretty soon, she'd be the one begging him to teach her things. Pushing away his petty fantasies, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting all his frustration bleed out of him. When that didn't help as much as he thought it would, he took another breath, then another, until eventually, the perpetual crease in his eyebrow finally smoothed out. Feeling he was calm enough now, he gathered his chakra and covered the sole of one foot and stuck it to the wall. He tugged on it lightly and had to adjust the flow when it came off with minimal effort. He forced the brief return of his frustration to the back of his mind and tried again. Thickening his chakra a little more than before, he gave it another test pull and grinned when it didn't move. He nodded and took a moment to memorize the exact amount of chakra he was using. Once he felt he had it down, he tried his other foot, stuck it to the wall, and took a step. It was wobbly, barely passable compared to Naruto and Sakura, but after a few quick adjustments to his chakra, he eventually settled. Without giving himself time to second-guess, he took another deep breath and stepped forward. Then he stepped forward again and again. He didn't stop until he was sure he was standing at the midway point of the wall. When he opened his eyes and saw that he smirked, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to maintain his concentration. "You did it, Sasuke-kun. I knew you could do it," Sakura praised, smiling as demurely as she could while upside down. Naruto huffed, feeling a mixture of pride in her teaching skills and annoyance at Sasuke's success. Whatever. Good. That just meant she wouldn't have to teach him as long. Eventually, it was time for Kakashi to reveal himself. He'd observed them long enough to develop a firm understanding of their personalities and given them more than enough time to make some progress on their tree-walking training. It was now time to introduce himself to his potential team. With a body flicker, Kakashi entered the room through an open window. Naturally, none of the children noticed his arrival. He was about to announce himself and invite them to the roof, so they could begin when he felt a twinge of mischief. He could turn this into a lesson. A ninja is supposed to have incredible spatial awareness and perception, after all. And sure, while neither of these rookies were at all experienced enough to be the perceptive yet, it was never too soon to learn. Plus, after doing nothing but watching for so long, boredom had set in. Their reactions should be amusing enough to make it all worth it. Still, since this was meant to mostly be a lesson, he made some mental rules. If they took longer than 10 minutes to notice him, he'd make the bell test harder. Maybe add in a search element and make them find him. If not, maybe he'd pass them on the spot. Yeah, probably not. He'd make the test easier, though. Yeah, that sounds like a good compromise. Kakashi nodded to himself and sat down in the teacher's chair. He leisurely kicked up his feet and pulled out his favorite book to read. For several minutes, the Jonin split his attention between silently reading and watching Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke train. Multiple times, one or the other children nearly turned in his direction and spotted him. Fortunately, either by luck or divine providence, something always seemed to distract them before they could. When a quick glance at the classroom clock told him 10 minutes had passed, he grinned a bit evilly before smoothing his face into a bored, uncaring expression. He made the next page turn in his book intentionally louder, leaning further into his chair to cause it to squeak. Immediately, all three heads snapped towards him. Sakura visibly startled, her eyes blowing wide at the sudden stranger in the room. Naruto dropped into a fairly standard, if shaky, defensive stance as her fears slowly settled. Sasuke also started to jump with fright, only to forcefully stop himself and drop into a similar, more solid, defensive stance. His expression smoothed out the fastest of the three, but that split second of fear he showcased nearly made Kakashi break character. As it was, his chest spasmed with suppressed laughter. Vuvuha, sekure staterd. How did you? Naruto shouted, annoyed and confused. Sasuke was the only one to remain silent, glaring at him like he was already planning revenge. He could only be glad that his mask hid the grin that spread across his face. Yeah, he could totally see why Naruto found messing with him so fun. It was almost as fun as messing with Ob. Yo, Kakashi drawled, forcefully cutting off that line of thought as he snapped his book shut. Team 7, meet me on the roof. And as quick as he appeared, he disappeared out the same window he came through, jumping up the roof to wait. Hopefully, Sasuke and his sensei's child didn't disappoint him. He fought so hard to get both on his team, It'd be a shame for them to fail. Naruto stood frozen a few seconds after their sensei disappeared, her racing pulse slowly but surely calming down. It was only when she registered the dent in her pride that she snapped back to the present. She'd been pranked by an old man. Her brow furrowed as her lips twisted with distaste. The prankster king got pranked, and it wasn't even a good prank. "Oh, it's on," she growled quietly, turning to stomp out to the rooftop. She peripherally registered Sasuke, immediately following behind her, Sakura's footsteps joining them seconds later. When they finally reached the top of the stairs and opened the doors, she saw the target of her ire. He was sitting against the railing, half-lidded gray eyes twinkling with barely suppressed amusement. A soft breeze ruffled his hair, making him look so cool that it only ignited her irritation even further. Oh, if she didn't know attacking him outright would do absolutely nothing, she would have lunged at his stupid smug face right then and there. "Good evening, Team 7. Take a seat," the man said pleasantly, his tone grating on Naruto's bruised ego. Still, she grumbled and took a seat anyway. She'd get him back eventually. Sasuke grunted at the order, but did the same while Sakura nervously sat in the middle. "Perfect. Now, let's start with introductions. Just state your name, your likes, your dislikes, and your dreams for the future." Naruto narrowed her eyes at him. "Why don't you start, sensei? We already know each other a little bit, but we don't know anything about you." Their sensei hummed, tapping his chin. "All right then. My name is Itachi Kakashi. My likes, I don't want to tell you. My dislikes, I don't want to tell you either. As for my dreams, I don't have any right now. Your turn, Blondie." Kakashi smiled, his eyes forming bright crescent shapes. "We didn't learn anything but your name." All three children shouted in their minds. Naruto huffed, straightening up anyway. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, or Naruto, depending on what form I'm in. I like ramen, Ino-chan, Hinata-chan, and the Yamanaka clan. I don't like lazy people or perverts. My dream is to be Hokage and bring back the Uzumaki clan." Sakura's head whipped in her direction, genuine surprise on her face. Sasuke, meanwhile, paused, his eyes narrowing in her direction. "You have a clan?" Naruto turned to her teammate, missing the suddenly sharp, scrutinizing look of her new sensei. Not anymore. They were wiped out at the end of the Second Great Shinobi War. Onimiko said some Uzumaki might have survived the attack that killed them all, so one of my dreams is to find lost Uzumaki and hopefully bring them back to Konoha. Sasuke said nothing for a while, his gaze studying her. Thankfully, before things could get awkward, he huffed and turned away. Naruto rolled her eyes at his reaction and turned back to their sensei. "All right, next you, Pinky." Kakashi interrupted before they could get distracted. Sakura's mouth clamped shut from the question she was about to ask. My name is Haruno Sakura. I like, flower pressing. I don't like spicy food. My dream is to improve my ninja skills," and she trailed off, a dreamy look crossing her face as she looked at Sasuke. Naruto rolled her eyes at that last part as Sasuke did his level best to ignore it. Now that she didn't have such a big crush on her anymore, she could see how annoying Sakura's obsession really was. If she doesn't get that straightened out, I might have to tell Auntie Miko. After all, she already knocked that obsession out of Ino. "Now you, broody mabroody." Naruto bit her bottom lip to stop from laughing, while Sakura sent him the stink eye. Maybe their sensei wasn't that bad, after all. She'd still be pranking the hell out of him, though. Sasuke grunted, ignoring the twitch in his eyebrow as he steepled his hands in front of him to hide his expression. "My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I hate a lot of things, and I don't particularly like anything. What I have is not a dream, because I will make it a reality. I'm going to restore my clan and destroy a certain someone." Naruto frowned, confused over who he hated so much that he wanted to kill them. Sakura only blushed, shyly sneaking glances at his, quite frankly, scary face. Silence settled over the new team for a while before Kakashi clapped. All right, that's introductions in order. Now, normally, I'd take you three out to a training ground and give you the real Genin test. Unfortunately, it's getting late and I have stuff to do. So, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp, meet me at training ground 7. Hearing that, Sakura and Sasuke stiffened. What do you mean real Genin test? Aren't we already Genin? Sakura shouted. Sasuke huffed, masking his confusion with another glare. Naruto, having already known about this, just accepted the information and sat back. Kakashi grinned, the amusement reaching his eyes. That was just to see who had the capacity to become Genin. The real test starts tomorrow. Of the 27 students who graduated this year, only 9 will become a team under a Jonin instructor. That's a 66.7% fail rate. The 3 students shivered as his gimlet. I passed over each of them. Naruto mentally cursed. Damn, she knew this test was coming, but no one told her the pass rate was that low. She could only hope and pray that her teaching made Sakura and Sasuke more willing to work with her. Otherwise, they were screwed. Kakashi reveled in their panic, letting them see the evil twinkle in his eye. Remember, team, 9 a.m. tomorrow, training ground 7. Oh, and I'd recommend not eating breakfast. You might throw up. Yone. With one last lazy wave, the Jonin disappeared and left the 3 panicking Genin to their own devices. For a second, all 3 stared at the space their sensei disappeared from, expressions blank as his ominous words rang in their ears. The suddenness of his departure cut through their panic and discomfort and left them tense with uncertainty. Naruto was the first to snap out of it. Her previous irritation suddenly flared at his cool ninja exit and overwhelmed her unease like a ship caught in a whirlpool. Damn, he's good, she muttered, eyes narrowing into the distance. Sasuke and Sakura snapped back to the present upon hearing her words. Sasuke reacted first, scoffing and rolling his eyes at her. Of course he's good, dope. He's a Jonin. Did you think he'd be as weak as you? Sakura nodded in agreement, even as she subtly admired Sasuke's annoyed expression. Right, you can't use the same academy standard for a Jonin, especially not one chosen to teach Sasuke-kun. Obviously, our sensei is going to be extremely strong. Naruto only rolled her eyes at them, ignoring Sakura's patented fangirling. Obviously, I know he's a good ninja. That's not what I was talking about. I meant that he's really good at messing with people. Like, we haven't even known him for longer than 10 minutes, and I already want to kick his ass. If he didn't piss me off so much, I'd ask him for tips. Sakura paused her fawning and frowned slightly, giving Naruto a mildly reproachful stare. Don't say that about our sensei. He'll fail us if he hears you. And what do you mean he was messing with us? Besides scaring us in the classroom, he didn't do anything else. Naruto scoffed a little before puffing out her chest with pride. Please, when it comes to messing with people, I'm an expert. Trust me, he was definitely messing with us. Think about it. How annoyed did you feel when he scared us in the classroom? Or when he completely ignored our questions about him, or called us names, or sat in the wind, trying to look cool and mysterious? Sakura's frown deepened, mouth opening to respond only for nothing to come out. Didn't you see that sparkle in his eye when he called Sasuke Broody Mabroody? He was trying so hard not to laugh. And then he tried to trick us by telling us not to eat before a major test. Don't you think that's suspicious? He's probably going to intentionally be late tomorrow too and leave us starving for hours. Naruto shouted, squeezing her hands like she was imagining wringing his neck. Now, it was Sasuke's turn to frown, his initial dismissal suddenly dissolving as the facts were laid for him. Damn, that was a good point. Since when was this dobe so observant? Wasn't she an idiot? Sakura's certainty also began to falter, understanding slowly creeping into her mind. Was Naruto right? Was their sensei really messing with them? It was just so out of character for what she imagined a sensei to be. Did they just get a weird sensei, or were all Jonin this tricky? But why would he do that? We don't know what the test is. Maybe he really was just looking out for us. She tried, unwilling to entirely believe an authority figure was this immature. Naruto sighed, shaking her head with mock pity. Oh, Sakura. Poor naive Sakura. Do you really think you're strong enough to take on a Jonin on an empty stomach? Think about it. No matter what this test is, we'll have to face Kakashi-sensei in some kind of battle. It might be fighting, or it might be mind tricks, but we're fighting a super elite ninja. I'm not strong enough to beat a Jonin, neither is Sasuke. We'd all have to team up to even have a chance, and even then, we probably won't win. Sakura's brow twitched, her condescending tone making her hands itch. She narrowed her eyes and let hair fall over them in shadow, cracking her knuckles. Naruto's teasing smile disappeared like smoke as a shiver ran down her spine. She took an involuntary step back, raising her hands nervously. Hey, I'm just kidding, you know. I was just playing. Please don't hit me. Thankfully, before Sakura could indulge in her characteristic bloodlust, Sasuke clicked his teeth in annoyance, drawing their attention. Naruto is right. He played us. I should have expected a Jonin would be this cunning, but I thought shinobi were more professional than this. Messing with genin like this. He muttered, hands clenching into fists. Naruto shrugged, taking the opportunity to subtly take a few more steps away from Sakura, crossing her arms behind her head. I think most are. Inoichi-san seems pretty professional when he's not getting all funny over Ino. Maybe all Jonin are like this. But forget about that right now. She locked eyes with both her teammates as a malicious grin spread across her face. Do you want to get back at him? The question landed with a quiet tension, temporarily silencing all conversation. Sakura's eyes widened, genuinely shocked anyone would even think of getting back at a Jonin, let alone say it out loud. And she wanted help. Sasuke, meanwhile, was less surprised. This was just the kind of stupidity he was used to when it came to Naruto. Still, he could tell she was dead serious about this, and part of him couldn't decide whether that was something to admire or preemptively mourn. Still, despite not wanting to encourage her continued idiocy, his annoyance with their new sensei was stronger than his common sense. Just like Naruto, Kakashi had thoroughly irritated Uchiha Sasuke, and if nothing was done about it now, it would only keep happening. Sakura's shock and worry only got worse when Sasuke didn't immediately reject her. This was the dumbest idea she'd ever heard. Why were they even considering this? Was Sasuke-kun really? Fine, what do you have in mind? It better not be anything stupid or you're on your own. Naruto's grin only widened, lowering her arms to rub her hands evilly. First things first, we need information. And I know just who to ask. With a confident turn that made her hair flutter appropriately dramatically, she stepped onto the railing and hopped onto the nearest rooftop. Sasuke didn't hesitate to follow, having decided to just go all in. He could always just blame her if they got caught anyway. Sakura, the last person on the roof, whimpered slightly before reluctantly following after them. I really should have listened to Mom and gone to trade school. She muttered, hoping against hope she didn't lose her chance to become a ninja because of this. Beneath the railing, in a spot just above the highest windows of the academy, the air shimmered like the heat haze in Suna's deserts and solidified into a humanoid shape. Unbeknownst to them, the very target of their scheming had been eavesdropping, smiling wider than he had in years. Now, this is something. These kids think they can pull one over on me? Fine. I could use a good laugh, too. Kakashi chuckled ominously, disappearing from his spot like he'd never been there. For the first time since he was forced to become a Jonin sensei, he was genuinely looking forward to tomorrow's test. Naruto grinned as she reached her destination, the Yamanaka flower shop. At this time of day, Ani Miko was probably the only one inside. Inoichi-san didn't get home from T&I until late, so she'd just have to ask her auntie. After all, if there was anybody in Konoha that had all the dirt on other shinobi, it was the Yamanaka clan. Naruto, why are we at Ino's shop? I get that Ino's the gossip queen, But she isn't going to know more about Kakashi-sensei than we do, Sakura asked with confusion and a little annoyance, stumbling behind Sasuke as they hopped to the ground from the rooftops. You better not be wasting my time, dope, Sasuke grunted, hands stuffed into his pockets. We're not here for Ino, Naruto said, ignoring Sasuke completely. Ino and Ani Miko, said the Yamanaka clan, are one of the best clans in the village at information gathering. One of them has to know Kakashi-sensei's secrets. Without waiting for a response, Naruto pushed open the door to the shop. Her smile widened when she caught sight of exactly the person she was looking for. Ani Miko, we need your help. Miko, currently pruning a sickly flower, didn't look up as she replied. No, I'm not helping you prank anyone. No, I won't be your alibi. No, Ino is not here. She ignored Naruto's over-dramatized, offended spluttering as she flicked her eyes up from her task. Her eyes widened with pleasant surprise upon seeing what was presumably her genin team behind her. Oh, is this your team, Naruto? Sakura-chan, so nice to see you again. Oh, at least let me explain. Sakura smiled awkwardly, giving the older woman a shy wave as they both ignored her. They hadn't seen each other since she and Ino stopped being friends, but Sakura remembered how kind Ino's mom always was. Hello, Miko-san. Nice to see you again. I've missed seeing you around the shop. I know you and my Ino seem to have had some sort of falling out. I don't know why and I won't ask, but come around more often, will you? Sakura's smile turned a little more genuine, her cheeks dusting a light red. Sure, Miko-san. I can do that. Miko nodded, satisfied, and turned to Naruto's third teammate with an equally warm smile. Uchiha-san, it's nice to officially meet you. Sasuke nodded politely, utilizing long, nearly forgotten clan manners to bow his head slightly. You as well, Yamanaka-sama. Miko's eyes twinkled with mirth as she waved her hand. Oh, please, no need for the formalities. Outside of clan matters, just call me Miko or Yamanaka-san if you're not that comfortable. Yamanaka-san then. With another approving nod, she finally turned her attention back to the pouting Uzumaki prankster in front of her. Are you done now? I really need your help, Naruto asked a little petulantly. I stand by what I said. I won't help you prank anyone, but why don't you tell me what's going on anyway? It's our sensei. He's so ugly. I've never met anyone more annoying than him. He pranked me, Ani. Me. He made us wait hours for him to show up, and when we started training out of boredom, he snuck in and scared us. Miko's lips twitched with amusement. Who's your sensei? She asked, despite already having a good guess. Hatake Kakashi. And if that wasn't bad enough, he spent our entire team introduction playing mind games and trying to annoy the hell out of us. He told us not to eat before our test tomorrow. So I need dirt. You don't have to help me prank him back, Ani Miko, but at least tell me more about him. He didn't give us anything but his name. Miko giggled, hand coming up to cover her mouth. Yes, that sounds like him. So you do know him? Naruto shouted triumphantly. She nodded. Ido, I can tell you some of his basic information, but if you want more, there's someone better you can ask. Naruto nodded excitedly. Who? An image of a certain eccentric taijutsu specialist flashed through her mind. Might Guy, Kakashi-san's self-professed eternal rival and good friend. He's the Jonin of Team 9. You'll find him most days on Training Ground 43. Got it. We'll go see him after this. But first, tell us more about Kakashi-sensei. Miko smiled fondly and began speaking, eyes twinkling with mischief. Looks like you really messed up, little Kakashi. Naruto is just like Kushina and you're out of practice. I wish you all the luck in the world. An hour later, Team 7 left Yamanaka Flower Shop with identical looks of shock. Without conscious thought, they began walking down the busy thoroughfare vaguely in the direction of Training Ground 43. The reason for their shock? The credentials and achievements of their lazy, annoying sensei. Chunin at 6, Jonin at 12. Naruto muttered disbelievingly, barely concealed on her face. Sharingan no Kakashi. Sasuke continued, fists tightening with anger and confusion. Said to have mastered over 1,000 jutsu. Sakura finished, suddenly a lot more worried about their plan to prank him. They walked in silence, individually processing the idea that their sensei was someone so strong, so famous. Naturally, it was Naruto that broke out of their fugue state first. Fine, Kakashi-sensei was more impressive than she thought, but she'd never been someone who backed down. Lots of people had scary reputations, but that didn't mean they were scary all the time. Plus, she just couldn't imagine their lazy troll of a sensei as anything other than an annoying troll. Right, we now know who our target is. We knew he was strong already, so this doesn't change anything. Everyone has weaknesses, and hopefully, this might guy will tell us what those are. Naruto's determined words pulled her teammates out of their heads. Are you crazy? Did you not hear? Sakura began before Sasuke interrupted her. I hate to say it, but Naruto's right. Sakura snapped her mouth shut. Naruto's head snapped towards him, a bewildered expression on her face. I am. Sasuke grunted. Either way, we'll have to face him for the test. Even if pranking him doesn't pan out, learning Kakashi's weaknesses before that test is a good plan regardless. For a minute, both of his teammates stared at him in shock. That was the longest they'd ever heard him speak. Not only that, he was agreeing with Naruto over something. What? Sasuke growled out, brows furrowing with annoyance. Are you okay? Is the sky falling? Naruto looked up. No, it's still there. Sasuke clicked his teeth. Don't go getting a big head about this, dope. For once you had a good idea. I may not like this team, but short of complaining to the Hokage, I'm stuck with you two deadweights. At the very least, you're the best at annoying people, and talking to this Mike guy might get us more than just intel for the best prank. Naruto stared at him for a moment longer before she finally replied. I'll never get used to you talking that much, but I'll take it. Okay, next stop, Training Ground 43. Come on. Wait, Naruto, are we really sure we should be doing this? We just heard how powerful Kakashi-sensei is. Sasuke-kun makes a good point about gaining more intel about him for the test, but to prank him? He's a jonin. None of us are strong enough to get one over on a jonin. Sakura interrupted, catching the attention of her teammates. Naruto stopped, her expression slightly confused and slightly offended. Sakura, you know I've pranked the AMBU before, right? Sakura's brain stuttered at that, her expression shifting from concern to muted horror. And Naruto, what do you mean by that? The Uzumaki grinned with pride, not missing the brief expression of shock on Sasuke's face at that admission. Exactly what I said. I met this really weird, dango-obsessed lady when I was 8. She dared me one time to prank her friend in the AMBU. It was so much harder than pranking even the Academy Shinobi, so even though I got caught, I didn't give up until I finally pranked them. It took me years, but eventually I got really good at it. Pranking a jonin isn't that different for me. Sakura froze, suddenly feeling a little faint as she realized just how crazy her teammate really was. She'd always known Naruto was chaotic and hyperactive, but to even think about pranking the ANBU. Why did the Hokage put her on this team? Now, come on, we gotta hurry. Hopefully, Gai-sensei is still training there. And with that, the blonde turned around and hopped back up to the rooftops. Sasuke followed a few seconds later, body moving despite his brain racing with his own brand of horror and awe. Yes, after what Naruto just revealed, he was just a little bit in awe. Sakura, once again, was left behind. Her face remained blank as she slowly brought her hands up into the sign of the tiger. With a quick pulse of her chakra, she mentally muttered, "Release." When nothing changed, she was forced to conclude she wasn't in Genjutsu. Unbeknownst to her, something in her mind had snapped with all the revelations and chaos of the day. She hadn't lost her sanity or anything serious, but her understanding of normal would never be the same again. I want to go home, she mentally sobbed.